It all started with the fact that the heroine was one step away from death. She lay with a fever for a whole week. She opened her eyes for a moment and remembered that she had once read a book about herself in a past life. Lillian Islar. However, they decided to ask the residents what she was like. The servants and maids did not speak very well of this woman. It was said that it was not worth her to become a mother, and she constantly felt sorry for herself. A servant girl bent over the girl's bed and kept crying, bemoaning the fact that the little child was treated so cruelly, as if they were deliberately waiting for her parents to leave this world. She was angry with Cedric, who was no longer interested in anything but politics, and betrothed the girl for his own gain. But the maid asked the lady not to worry, because he would always be there for her. The little lady trusted this woman, so she threw herself into her arms after her words. The nurse assured that everything would be fine. Just let the lady obey her. The girl unsuspectingly promised this. That's how she became a victim, and from that day, the story of the thief began. Over time, the nurse began to show her true face even more strongly. She made a fortune out of herself, but in reality, she only wanted treasures. The heroine even got pregnant in order to get even a drop of attention from her indifferent husband. After the birth of the child, she received the shocking news that she would no longer be able to have children. The child grew up little by little, but every day the son only annoyed the heroine more. The child did not understand anything yet, but the lady blamed her for the fact that she could not have any more children because of her son. Her son was subjected to considerable torture every day. Once, at a small tea party, the heroine's friends were interested in how her son was growing up. They heard that the young man even fell down the stairs. The lady replied that everything is fine. She replied that she would heal her son through her love. However, no one could guess that it was the mother who caused her son to fall down the stairs. Somehow, the servants, impatient to keep all this quiet, broke in, and they complained to my lord that the lady was being cruel to the child. The lady herself was called to the office. She was sure he would be angry, but she was glad that at least this would be the first time they could talk since their wedding day. However, the man only replied that it was none of his business. Pan left her to deal with it herself, and she was angry that Damien had dared to ignore her like that, so she decided to take revenge with her own death. This is how Lillian met her tragic end, alone with her son. Mental wounds received by the main character were healed by the main character. Thanks to her, the protagonist copes with the trauma and overcomes his father, who eventually loses his mind after the death of his wife. The novel ends happily on this note, throwing her husband and son into the abyss of despair, giving impetus to the storyline to a happy ending. This, according to the author's idea, was the only role of Lillian. However, now she has decided that she does not want to repeat the fate of the heroine. When she found herself at the same moment, still a child next to the crying nurse, she silently gave the woman a necklace. The nurse was quite happy with such a gift and promised to serve the lady forever, but the girl refused and said that from today the maid was fired, and this was her last payment. The maid did not understand at all why the lady spoke like that and asked her not to joke like that. She could not understand what she had done wrong to deserve release. To this, the little lady replied that she knew how the nurse abused her brother instead of her mother, and that she tried to make the relationship with her sister worse. After that, the girl gave the maid a choice. Either she would shout that the maid had stolen the necklace, or she would leave herself. The woman understood that she was not in the position to set the rules, so she left. Lillian breathed a sigh of relief. She solved one problem, but then it was more difficult, because now it was her half-brother, Cedric Islar's turn. When she first heard about the engagement, she fainted at the news and went to bed for a week. After that, she came to her brother's office because she wanted to talk. Although the boy was so tired, he decided to listen to his sister. In turn, Lillian apologized for showing such a strange reaction to the engagement, but she wanted to say that she respected his choice, so she was not against it at all. The young man did not expect such a reaction from his sister, so he asked again to make sure that he heard everything correctly. The girl saw her brother's surprise and assured her that she had simply thought carefully about her behavior. However, the brother wanted a more detailed explanation from her. The little lady replied that while she was unwell, she had a lot of time to think about everything. She continued and said that she got everything only because she bore the surname Turinska. She had the great honor of being born in this family, but before that, the girl was just indifferent. She owed these carefree days only to her background. Still, she understood that the Islar family had obligations to the citizens of the Turin lands. First of all, there was a special oath of protection. Now she understood that she could not take everything for granted, because special rights gave birth to special duties, and that was exactly what she thought. Cedric was genuinely surprised by her words. She reminded him of his father. The girl did not hear his words and asked again, but the brother said to ignore it. The girl smiled. She understood that her brother did not love her very much because she was his stepmother's daughter, so she wanted to somehow improve her relationship with him. Nevertheless, she wanted to stop at that today. So after informing her brother that she had said everything she wanted, she was going to leave. The young man stopped her for a moment and asked if she had any other questions. For example, with whom she was engaged. The girl said that she did not know or could ask such questions. In fact, Lillian understood that it was only the name of engagement. In fact, it is a secret union after the murder of the Turin couple. She said that she thought she was not yet worthy to know about any secrets, but her brother objected because it directly concerned her. The sister was surprised that her apology would have such an effect. However, her brother didn't insist if she didn't want to know. The girl said that she wanted to, so Cedric took out a piece of paper and said that her husband would be Emperor Leningrad. As is known by name, he was a relative of the current emperor and was one of those who had the right to the throne. Knight of the Golden Sword, Demian Palmyra Erst Rufenbein. The girl pretended to be a little surprised, although she already knew everything in advance. Still, it was not surprising, because the Rufenbein family, even in spite of other families, were like gods of war. She blushed a little. Although her future husband was a great man, his indifference to the throne was even a little suspicious. The brother concluded with this, but said that if the sister still had questions, she could always turn to him. The girl noticed that her brother was somehow surprisingly kinder today. It was a little strange. She looked at his face and noticed that there were dark circles under her brother's eyes. The lady immediately rushed to him, asking how much he slept today. The boy turned away and said it shouldn't have worried her, but the sister said it wasn't right, because they were family after all. He could not believe what he heard, because he was sure that after the death of his parents, he would definitely be alone, but he did not expect that his sister would not be indifferent to him. Cedric had forgotten about it. The guy put his hand on her head, repeating her words. The girl was a little disappointed, but she was still happy. She took his hand for a moment and said that she still wanted something from him. Lillian began to lead him to the bedroom, telling him that he needed sleep. He laughed, but promised to fulfill his sister's request. The girl was quite happy. As soon as the young man lay down, he immediately closed his eyes and fell asleep. The nurse wished him good dreams and quietly left the office. The secretary entered the office, but he did not know that the gentleman had dozed off a little, so he accidentally woke him up. After waking up, Cedric told his sister to increase the budget about 5 times. After some time, the maids called the lady to the room, and there a lot of gifts from her brother were waiting for the girl. There were many new and expensive things, an easel for drawing, books, chess. The girl also found a precious necklace there, which was made of pure diamonds. She liked the new things very much. She thought that her brother had selected everything that the young lady might like, but suddenly, she wondered why they had brought all this to her. The girl had never received gifts from her brother before, so she thought it was for an engagement. The maid noticed that the lady was a little upset, so she began to show various things. She really liked the toy that the maid showed her. The girl thought that due to the fact that her engagement was a dead weight on her brother's soul, he decided to somehow compensate her for everything. The maids were going through the boxes with gifts, and the girl noticed that the maids were more happy than her. Suddenly, Lillian noticed something. After that, the little lady decided to visit her brother again. To his question about the reason, the sister replied that it was just like that. The brother's cold voice was a bit frightening, but now she understood that in the future, Cedric would become a wonderful master of the land of Turin. Just now he was oppressed by the sharp burden of his head. The girl understood that now, first of all, he needed rest. Last time she had a reason to take a promise from him, but she was sure that this time he would not listen to her. Therefore, this time she came with a tray of tea in front of him and wanted to thank him for all the gifts. Cedric scowled a little and said that if she didn't like something, she could deal with it herself. She started to brush it off, saying that she liked everything. Because she had never had such things before, she was just a little surprised. And although she understood that these gifts were only compensation, it could not be that he liked the stepmother's daughter. She was no less grateful to him. About himself, the head noticed that his sister would need to buy new clothes. He spoke, that he was glad that she liked everything. Now the girl also wanted to give him something. The lady said she had learned the tea ceremony, so she wanted to treat him to tea. Suddenly, the brother noticed that his sister's hand was injured. Lillian refused, that she accidentally scalded herself while studying. She refused, that nothing terrible happened. The girl planned everything in detail, but something troubled her. The lady looked at her brother, and he, after a little silence, finally agreed to her invitation. The sister was very happy. Tea culture had only recently come to them from the other side of the sea, so it was all new to their empire. In the future, the tea ceremony will become fashionable and become one of Lillian's favorite things. She learned about everything related to it. However, most of all, she will like not the aroma of tea, but its warmth, which then spread throughout the body and was able to warm even in the coldest winter. That is why she wanted to treat her brother to tea, so that he could relax a little. The sister tried to brew tea as long as possible. However, the brother noticed that the sister had been doing this for a long time and reported it. In a couple of minutes, she finished it, and holding out a cup, told her brother to try it. Cedric took a sip and looked at the cup with great surprise, not expecting the tea to be so strange. The guy was somewhat disappointed, because the tea tasted bitter and cloyingly sweet. He did not say it out loud, but the girl immediately said that the tea was not very tasty. He said that it was not so bad, and the sister thanked him for such a kind assessment. Nevertheless, she asked to drink this tea with the thought that she had put her soul into it. The brother was amazed, but could not refuse his sister this request. He looked at his sister. And then I went to the tea table and thought that I hadn't relaxed like that in a long time. Lillian immediately asked if she could come with tea tomorrow, but she didn't mind if her brother was busy. The guy said that he would wait for her. The girl was very happy and promised that she would train better to make him the most delicious tea. The brother wanted to say something else, but the girl wouldn't let him insert the words and left the office after saying goodbye. The girl was satisfied with herself, because if she had clung to her brother longer, he would have been unhappy. In the office, Cedric felt a little depressed. He turned to Alan and asked how long it would take to transfer the land to his sister. The secretary wondered why the gentleman needed it, since the lady was already engaged. However, the boy said that it was too early to talk about marriage. The next morning, when Lillian was on her way to her brother's tea party, she met Knight Hyvis. The guy smiled and said he was just an assistant. Alan Hyvis was her brother's loyal vassal, and yet another person her mother had mistreated. He hated the young lady very much, but of course things had changed recently. The boy asked her if she was going to the master, and noticing the tray in the girl's hands, apologized, because he had not noticed before that there were few servants in their place. Lillian looked back at the maid who was standing behind her, and realized that the knight had misunderstood everything and wanted to tell her about it. The assistant wanted to take the tray to bring everything himself, but the girl noticed his look and understood that all this was a kind of test. She understood that she had made a mistake, because their servants were loyal citizens of Turin, and the fact that she did not trust them with their work meant neglecting them, so she quickly returned the tray. The knight noticed that the girl did not admit her guilt and did not immediately start apologizing. He thought it was a good reaction. In a moment, both were in the office, and Cedric raised his head. When the door opened, the brother told the sister to sit down. While the girl was pouring tea, the boy said that he had heard that Lillian had fired the nurse. The brother wanted to hear the reason for this, and the girl, evading the answer a little, said that she had not fulfilled her duties. Hearing this, he slammed his cup. The sister was very surprised by such a reaction of her brother, but the boy was only angry with the nurse, thinking that she could do such a terrible thing while the girl was sick. Cedric blamed himself for having overlooked it, but told his sister to be more careful with such dismissals, as rumors might spread. She agreed at once, but said it would be strange if the servants began to say anything, for before dismissing the nurse, she had given her a considerable payment. The boy was surprised that his sister was not afraid at all, but the girl did not understand why she should be afraid. Lillian explained that her brother was one of the 7 key figures in the empire, so why did she, as his sister, have to fear the release of some wet nurse? He was genuinely surprised by her thoughts, because before, the girl who seemed so weak now believed in him so much. Cedric began to understand even more strongly what his responsibility was, so he kindly answered his sister that now she definitely had nothing to fear. He would take care of everything. In a very short time, the brother found a new housekeeper for his sister. Mrs. Hyvis said hello and said she would be doing the ladies' business from now on. The girl was surprised, because the housekeeper will be responsible for all the maids. She said she didn't deserve such servants. The woman reassured her and said that there was nothing in Turin that a lady did not deserve. But if the girl so desired, then the housekeeper could be her personal servant for the time being. The girl did not know what to say, and the housekeeper took it as consent, so next she wanted to choose the lady's favorite cakes. Lillian did not understand why. Mrs. Havis said that the doctor would be coming to examine the lady soon, so she would bring her cakes after the examination. The girl replied that she was already ready for the examination, so she did not need sweets. The housekeeper was surprised, but did not have time to say anything, because there was already a knock on the door of the room, and the girl immediately turned her head to meet him. The doctor entered the room and immediately began the examination, but suddenly noticed that the lady, surprisingly, was quite calm. The girl replied that the doctor was saving her life, so she decided to behave more modestly. The man noticed that the lady had been behaving differently before, to which she said that she was just sick before. The doctor still did not trust the girl very much. In addition, she still needed to drink medicine. She took the jar and began to collect the spirit. The lady drank it all in one go, but the medicine was bitter. The housekeeper was a little angry with the doctor for not warning in advance, but the man already knew that Lillian would take the medicine. Distracted from business, Cedric wanted to ask the assistant something, but did not finish. But Alan guessed that the master wanted to ask his opinion about his sister. Nevertheless, he was interested in how long the knight had been so kind to the lady. The knight immediately replied that he had no more reason to be angry with the young lady. If he knew her well, then there was no reason to hate her. Besides, when Lillian herself dismissed the nurse, he looked at her with different eyes. He also said that Islar's blood still flowed in her. At first, the head smiled at the assistant's answer, and then, becoming serious, reminded that it was about his sister. While these two were messing around, the doctor raised his voice to draw attention to himself. The man wanted to ask the relatives in more detail whether the lady had any health problems. Cedric replied that this was not the problem. It was just that the sister somehow stopped resisting. Also, the head noticed that the sister stopped asking him for something, and interest in something suddenly disappeared, that there was a feeling as if she already knew about everything. He suddenly thought that the sister had become as calm as a lake without waves, and her eyes expressed the wisdom of a person who had lived a certain life, which did not suit her age at all. Cedric was worried about this, so he asked the doctor if the girl could behave like that. The show did not immediately come up with an answer. The doctor also noticed that even adults did not always restrain themselves in front of medical workers, but the lady behaved calmly. The man said that he should have asked Lillian about it directly. A maid came into the study and informed that the lady wanted to drink tea in the fresh air today. All three realized that it was a wonderful moment. Everything was already prepared for the tea party in the yard. The girl whispered something to the housekeeper, and she told all the maids that they would be rewarded for their good work. Meanwhile, the lady had already sat down at the table and began to examine all the sweets that had been brought. But she was a little sad because she did not know if her brother would come. The housekeeper immediately said that the gentleman would come. The girl still doubted, for she did not wish that all the servants' efforts should be in vain, to which Mrs. Havis again said that it was only for their pleasure. The lady smiled and said that she really appreciated the work of the maids, so she didn't want their efforts to go unnoticed. The housekeeper was moved by her words, but assured her that the gentleman could not fail to come. The girl wanted to believe it, because once she did not hold back her promise, when suddenly she was called from behind. Noticing Cedric, she immediately threw herself into her brother's arms. The guy caught her and noticed that the weather was really good today. Picking up his sister in his arms, he wondered if their lives had ever really had room for such carefree joy. They sat down at the table, and Mr. wanted to ask his sister her opinion about the events surrounding her engagement. The girl realized that her brother wanted to know whether she agreed to it under the pressure of something, but she had an answer to that too. 3 brothers, 3 princes of Rufenbein. The first took the throne after the death of his father, but died for unknown reasons while still young. The third was still too young and did not claim the throne, so the second brother became the emperor. A lot of blood was shed during his reign. One of the victims of the coup in the palace was her father, who was loyal to the previous emperor until the end, the former head of the Turin lands. Therefore, her engagement to the third son, the guardian and protector of the crown prince, who was able to contain the dust of the emperor, the second son, seemed to be something necessary. She also knew that her future husband had a strong army. Only his power could suppress all battles and empires. At 13, he already led the army and in 4 years prevented all rebellions. According to the story I read, although Damien did not love her, he lost his mind when he learned about her death. She understood that although the war had hardened him, many people had died at his hands, but he had always been loyal to her. She never heard that her husband had illegitimate children, He was very patient with her, even when Lillian had snapped at their son in the past. Although she understood that he was not so interested in her as to punish her for harming her son, she was not interested in it now. More importantly, she knew that Damien was rich and knew how to run things. Of course, he will later become the main thief, because according to the plot he killed half of the empire, but as a groom, he is not a bad option. Besides, she did not expect much from a loveless marriage. She ended by saying that the marriage was already arranged. The brother wanted to say something to this, but the sister calmed him down by saying that she had some thoughts about her future. She also understood that Damien would be a good ally, who would be bound not only by a document, but also by blood, so she accepted it as her duty to marry him. The brother looked at his sister, and noticing her look, realized that it was the look of a person who had already decided everything for herself. These thoughts made him a little sad, because he understood that his sister would soon stop sneaking up on him. Suddenly, the girl asked for a teacher. She explained that she was to become a member of the imperial family, but before that, she did not even know etiquette. The brother was surprised that no one had taught her this before. Cedric was surprised that neither the Marquis nor his father had taken care of the girl, even though she was already 12. The brother told her not to worry and promised to find the best teacher and clarified what exactly her sister would like to learn. Lillian began to count. While the girl was talking, the brother did not take his eyes off her. As promised, the brother hired a teacher, and the girl began to learn to weave. In 3 days, she made a beautiful thing. The woman complimented the lady, but she was somewhat disappointed. The teacher noticed this and assured that the thing made by Lillian was really beautiful and suitable for a gift. The woman said that the lesson was over for today, and another teacher would come soon. The housekeeper was amazed that a good teacher was found so quickly. She did not want to make him wait and dragged the girl to get ready. The lady wondered what the teacher would be like. The housekeeper asked which people the girl liked most, but she said that she had no special wishes. Nevertheless, she was sure that she would be taught by a woman, because it was generally accepted that way. But when she entered the room, she noticed a man, which greatly shocked her. The teacher noticed the lady's surprise, but replied that he was not an official teacher, but had come to teach her about basic etiquette skills. The girl realized that the man already knew about her marriage, so she was sure that he was on her brother's side. The lady apologized for the late greeting and thanked that the teacher would teach her. In the novel, Lillian Islar knew little about the affairs of the palace, but she never gave anyone a reason to make fun of her manners, because she knew well what to say and how to behave. At the end, the teacher praised the girl. She thanked him and said that she had been praised too much, as had her brother. The man noticed that the sister and brother were very close, to which the girl said that Cedric really took good care of her. The teacher smiled warmly. The teacher praised the girl again when he listened to her, because he noticed that she really learned the etiquette lessons well. Lillian thanked. The man asked if he could taste the tea that everyone was talking about. The girl did not mind and signaled to the servant to bring the set. When everything was brought, she herself began to pour the tea. The teacher carefully watched her actions. He was amazed how skillfully the girl did everything, even though she was still very young. The lady offered a sweet, but the man refused, and she simply handed him a cup. The teacher tasted it. However, the tea was again not tasty, and the teacher thought with regret that the lady did not even guess about it, but the girl did not even guess about it. Lillian herself said that the taste might be unusual, but the teacher did not let her finish, saying that everything was fine. Of course it was a lie, but looking at her face he couldn't say otherwise. When they finished tea, the girl asked his opinion. The teacher refused. That he liked everything, realizing in his mind that the cake turned out not so bad. The man said that it was an honor for him that the girl made him tea herself, to which she replied that on the contrary, it was a pleasure for her to do it for Duke Hemenrin. He was surprised. He asked how long the girl had known about this, to which the lady replied that the teacher did not hide it. Then the Duke apologized for coming to look at his grandson's future wife. She didn't take offense at him, but she already knew that the Duke was the maternal grandfather of the 3 princes, also had the title of Grand Duke. The man asked what if he had not been a duke. The girl replied that if he had not been a duke in the first place, he would have had no reason to see her, and his brother would not have let anyone in. Her answer made the Duke laugh. The man said, as he joked with his grandson's daughter-in-law, "Let the girl ask for anything she wants." The girl was surprised by such an offer, but thought that it was a kind of test. The Duke asked if she wanted any lands, or perhaps precious stones, which his daughter possessed. The lady was amazed that Hemenrin was willing to give the things to the late mother of the princes. However, she understood that if she did not answer anything, then she would be given something unusually expensive. She thought for a moment, and in a moment handed the Duke an ornament she had made herself and asked him to accept it. The man was amazed that everything turned out like this, but the girl replied that if he accepted this pendant, it would be the best gift for her. Looking at Lillian, the Duke could not refuse again, which made him laugh even more, until he left the palace in a walker. Meanwhile, the bridegroom of the girl was engaged in business in his palace. One of the assistants just came to him, reporting the situation. Although the prince was told that he behaved rather harshly, the young man only smiled at this, saying that it was not serious. In addition, he was upset that he was not allowed to look after the child, at which the knight was indignant and replied that no one knew that the prince would treat him like this. At this, His Majesty looked sternly at the assistant, and he immediately understood that he had made a mistake and apologized for his behavior. Looking at the prince, the knight asked how much he had slept, but Daman avoided the question by moving on to the problem with Matteo. The young man was not at all interested in what would happen to him, so he transferred everything to the assistant. The knight did not want His Majesty to speak so indifferently for his own blood, but he did not want to bring it up yet. He changed the subject and said he had brought a belt. The prince looked and noticed the pendant. The young man asked what it was, but the knight replied that it was the Duke's order. The prince looked at the pendant. His Majesty decided not to go into details for now and asked what else the knight had brought. The man immediately took out the papers and said that it was an engagement certificate. The prince did not like this initiative, but he knew that according to the laws of the empire, after receiving the certificate, after 3 years it was possible to dissolve the marriage. However, because of this stupid law, there were many reasons for infidelity on the part of the parties to the marriage. Whole alliances were destroyed in this way. The only way to prevent such a case was to exchange marriage certificates 3 years before the actual wedding. But of course, most noble families did not do this. Aristocrats themselves wanted to decide when to marry and when to dissolve a marriage. They had only 2 reasons for the certificate. The first, when young people loved each other so much that they did not want to wait. The second, when it was necessary to conclude an indestructible blood alliance. Thanks to this document, the knight said that the prince was officially considered married, with which he congratulated. Daman didn't even read them and threw them away, which worried the assistant because they were important documents. The prince forced the knight to collect them himself. While the knight was collecting papers, the prince told Ivan to start preparing troops for the front. The boy was surprised that messages had already arrived from the north. The knight was worried by the prince's haste, because there was no official order for mobilization, but the prince replied that he already knew what his brother was thinking. Daman said that the older brother wanted Matteo's guardian to be absent, then he could reach out to the little one. The knight began to worry even more, but the prince calmed him down and said that for now Claude would not kill the little one, because he was officially the crown prince. However, he was sure that all the riots that were taking place were the work of his brother, but he would want Matteo alive so that he would officially renounce the succession to the throne. In a whisper, he said that only after this, after about 10 years had passed, when everyone was indifferent, the crown prince would die. Isaac was surprised how the prince could know such details, to which His Majesty replied that he and Claude were brothers, and he would have done the same. Meanwhile, Lillian continued to learn etiquette, but this time she was taught by the main Marchioness of the Lannister family. The Marquise praised the lady for doing well in the lesson and said that it was enough to take part in the Ball of Silver Flowers. The girl replied that she was still a little worried, but the teacher said that a lady should always be ready for such an action. The lady asked what if she did something wrong and disgraced her family, to which the Marchioness reassured her and said that if she did things like today, that wouldn't happen. At the tea party, the brother also asked how his sister's training went. The girl immediately refused, that the housekeeper and the Marquise do everything to help her. Alec came up to them, handing over the box. The chief asked who it was from, and the knight replied that it was a gift from the Grand Duke. Cedric looked at the package with danger. The brother handed her the box and told her to open it quickly. He was also interested in what was inside. Opening the box, the lady saw an exquisite necklace. The knight approached and said that it looked like a piece of jewelry that the Empress once possessed. The girl was shocked. Lillian understood that she could not accept such a gift. The brother partially agreed with her, but said that it would be ugly to refuse a gift from the Grand Duke himself. The lady understood that if she wore this thing on her first appearance in public, there would be questions. But her brother thought that even if he didn't give it as a gift, it couldn't be compared to this luxury. Nevertheless, the girl was still worried that her engagement was a secret, and if she came wearing this necklace, then everyone would suspect something. But her brother reassured her. He said that only those who wanted a new emperor for the empire would attend the ball, and also thought that this was how the Duke was showing that he should not be rude to the future princess. The brother wished the sister a good time. The girl thanked, but she began to feel a strange anxiety. She came to the teacher, but she had a bouquet of flowers with her. The woman noticed this and asked why the lady did not ask her servants to bring flowers. The girl replied that the servants would bring the gift to the marquis, and she personally wanted to give the bouquet. The woman accepted the gift and smelled the flowers. Nevertheless, it was already time for them to go. The others were already waiting. When she entered the room, all the young ladies turned their heads towards them. Lillian greeted everyone, and some of the girls reciprocated. However, not everyone was happy with the new acquaintance. Moreover, noticing the necklace presented by the Duke on her, they began to look at each other with displeasure. The lady noticed that she was wearing a beautiful thing. The girl understood that she could not show it as if she were bragging, so she thanked her by replying that she could not wear it earlier because it was a gift for her debut. The girl asked if she could touch the jewelry, and Lillian could not refuse her new acquaintance. The older sister told Solaria that the girl should say thank you. The little lady immediately obeyed her sister and expressed her gratitude. The lady knew the two Lannister sisters because the teacher had talked a lot about them. The younger one also refused, that she heard a lot of good things about her from her grandmother and hoped to become friends. Other participants joined the conversation. One was even a little jealous that the Marquise herself was teaching Lillian. The young lady was also happy about this and said that the Marquise treated her well. While they were talking, one of the girls noticed that the neighbor was behaving strangely. Lady Marian was asked if she was feeling well, to which the girl almost jumped up and answered that everything was fine. However, the girl was angry that some unknown lady came to the tea party and immediately attracted all attention to herself. She also couldn't resist being presented with the necklace of the Empress herself, although she wasn't even given pearls for her debut. Lady Sophia noticed that the necklace was really beautiful, and Marianne gritted her teeth agreed. But in a moment, she blurted out to Lillian that accepting the Empress's jewelry showed herself not very modestly. The room instantly became quiet. Everyone looked at the evil lady in shock. Islar knew that even in the novel, this lady behaved quite categorically. Ilaria Lannister immediately came to the girl's defense and replied that it was a gift from Duke Hemenrin himself. A tense atmosphere hung in the room again, and in order to dilute it, one of the participants remembered that Lady Lillian was to make tea today. The girl immediately remembered that the new participant of the ball always prepared gifts for the rest, usually flowers or decorations, but her character had to make tea. The lady was shocked, but agreed. Islar quickly made tea and handed the cups to the lady. At first, the girls didn't like it very much, but with each sip, they realized that this drink is wonderful. While the ladies discussed the taste of the tea among themselves, the girl mentally thanked the teacher for being honest in teaching her. Marianne was still very angry, and even for a while did not want to try the tea, but under the gaze of the other ladies she dared, but almost spat out the drink. The others exhaled reproachfully. After tea, the elder Lannister offered to show Lillian's clothes as a thank you for the drink. All the other ladies wanted to go too. Marianne stayed with Lady Sophie. Her friend tried to calm her down, but she just stormed out, angry that everyone had left her. Out of anger, she could not forgive Lady Islar for such a concession, and began to throw cups. In a moment, Ilari and another lady returned to the room, agreeing with Lillian that they had been very rude to Marianne. But when they entered, they noticed a mess. The other girls began to demand that the lady apologize for her actions to Islar, but she did not even want to listen and only called her names. The young lady heard all this. However, she could not say anything because consciousness left her and she began to fall. Lannister noticed that something was wrong with the girl. A doctor was called for the lady. The woman said that she did not notice any symptoms, but said that the girl may have passed out from a strong shock. Marquise immediately turned to Ilari asking what had happened. The lady wanted to answer, but the younger sister preceded her, saying that Marie was very angry. The Marquise was very angry and asked where the culprit had gone, but the elder Lannister replied that she must have gone home. The girl's mother reassured the Marquise and said that they would write a letter to Marianne's family and would no longer be able to invite the lady to their home. Milady also asked that everything be brought to her to write a letter to the Duke. The woman explained that she had to tell everything, that it was not the Lannisters' fault. Ilara heard how angry her grandmother was and that they wanted to expel Marion from their circle. The girl understood that she had made a huge mistake. In his place, Cedric looked anxiously out the window. The knight asked what the matter was. The boy pointed to the imperial court in front of him. The emperor ruled it directly. It was a resting place for the nobility, and if there was no war, all conflicts were resolved here. Alan noticed that in this place the emperor increased his fame and strengthened his power. Cedric replied that this was only possible because the imperial court did not yet belong to the emperor. He had not undergone an official coronation. The knight replied that for this, it is still necessary to settle a lot. The assistant thought that this yard was chosen for the meetings. The young gentleman was very upset and said that he could not give his sister a gift in honor of joining society. Another knight entered the office and said that he had brought a letter from the Lannister estate. There was a black ribbon. The young gentleman quickly began to read, realizing that such a mark meant urgent news. Cedric quickly gathered himself and left the office without explaining anything. Alan imperceptibly peeked at the piece of paper and read that Lillian was unconscious. In a moment, the horses were already told to go to the barn. A housekeeper sat next to the lady's bed. The woman was very worried because she thought that the girl could be poisoned after learning about her union, and then she would not be able to bear it. Cedric also did not let go of his sister's hand for a moment while the doctor examined her. In a moment, the doctor announced that the girl was not poisoned, so nothing threatened her life yet. The brother did not understand what the doctor meant. The doctor explained that the lady is simply without strength, but you can't relax because what happened to her could be worse than the disease. Cedric was very upset, not believing that he had not noticed his sister's weaknesses before. Suddenly, the doctor decided to clarify the level of the young duchess. He was sure that she had a natural level, but he did not know what the energy was. The gentleman asked why the doctor asked about this and was explained that life force and magical energy were closely related. Thanks to this connection, if the life force is not enough, it can be replenished with Thera. The man continued and said that it also worked in the opposite direction. If the energy was not enough, then the strength also decreased. The boy still did not understand what the doctor was referring to, and he said that there was a disease in which magical energy flowed out of the body. It usually affected those who were on the verge of death. After such a magical core, which is in the heart, received incurable damage and kind of cracked, pouring out energy. Cedric understood that the doctor meant that there was something similar with his sister. The doctor confirmed that the lady had recently suffered an illness from which she barely recovered, so he once again asked the gentleman to check the number of Terrace in Lillian. If the lady's energy level was too low, then the doctor's theory was confirmed. The boy asked what would follow. In a moment, he was told that the patient dies after a certain time. There was no treatment for this either. Cedric couldn't believe it was happening, couldn't believe it could end like this. The head asked to find a way out, but the doctor could not do anything. The only thing they could do was buy some time. The man explained that Thera can be refilled from the outside. Cedric just needed to transfer his energy to his sister every day. The doctor said that they were lucky to be blood relatives, to which the boy only laughed helplessly, but said nothing. He did not know how long his sister would endure at such a pace, but he told the doctor to find a cure at all costs. When the doctor left, Mr. asked Alan whether the girl who scolded her sister was from the Blanchet family. It took some time, but Lillian has already gotten better. She was sitting in her brother's office and was a little nervous. The girl asked her brother not to be too strict with Marion and assured her that they did not want to do her any harm. Cedric walked up to her and lightly touched her head. He said that he was barely holding back from starting a war over this, but right now the most important thing for him was that his sister took care of her health. The lady agreed, and he smiled. The sun was already setting outside when the Grand Duke left Cedric's office. The boy did not want to see any of the Blanchets in his house, but he was assured that this was the only way they would have evidence. The boy was also interested in what would happen next with the engagement, because his sister's health had deteriorated. Herzog replied that such a minor problem was not a reason to break the marriage contract. Almost immediately, the Duke apologized for speaking so rudely about his future relative. The boy smiled at this and asked since when Hemenrin considered them relatives. The Duke remained silent on this, realizing that the young master did not want him to interfere. Marianne was ambitious and impudent, but she did things and did not go far from her relatives, but hoped for their forgiveness. In 4 days, Cedric received a letter of apology from Blanchett Hugo, where he said that the girl had been punished enough because her reputation was ruined. After reading, the boy tore up the letter. He then asked what was in the box. The knight replied that there was a necklace. In a minute, the young gentleman said angrily that he had been sent some strange letter and a box of garbage. The knight asked what to do with the thing from the box. The guy said that it should also be thrown away. The messenger was allowed to leave alive. He was shaking badly. The Grand Duke received a letter from Hilary and was very angry. He called Hugo to him. When he arrived, he was immediately accused of crossing all boundaries. But Blanchette did not understand what the problem was, because it was just a fight between two girls. The man tried to protect Marianne, but in doing so only provoked the Duke's fury. Hemerinus got impatient and said that he had been good to Hugo before because he was his sister's husband. But that was the end of it. The man wanted to apologize and finally accept his guilt, but he was not allowed to do so and was driven away. After that, the Duke stopped supporting the Blanchet family and Cedric so that his sister would not find out. He kept silent. Guests came to the girl when she recovered. So the spring passed. Summer and the first year of the reign of Claude I came. The order went out to destroy the remnants of the Kestel army in the north. This was entrusted to Prince Damien. Ivan was very angry because they were sent to fight only in words. In fact, they will die here. Provisions have already stopped in 3 places. More than half of the sent army are yesterday's peasants. There was no point in fighting them because they started looting the houses around because there was no food. He should have punished the soldier for this, but he couldn't. So he decided to discuss the situation with the prince first. The knight went to the tent where the prince lived and began to say that he wanted to discuss something, but the young man did not respond. Approaching, he noticed that the prince was sleeping very soundly and could not believe it. From birth, Rufenbein suffered from an excess of energy. His strength was innumerable, but along with his strength, the boy had many problems. He had trouble sleeping, auditory hallucinations, and a hot temper. For the young man, it was a lot of suffering. The knight quietly approached, because for the first time he saw the prince fast asleep. But in a moment Damien responded, which greatly frightened Isaac. The young man asked why the knight had come. The assistant quickly explained the situation with the crimes of the knights, and the prince gave the order to expel the criminals and not to feed the wounded man anymore. With this, he wanted to end the audience, but Ivan still wanted to convey a message from the Duke regarding the prince's bride. The knight began to report that she was in trouble, but the prince quickly cut him off, saying that he was not interested and that it was enough if the aide knew about it. Isaac still tried to tell, but Damien kept pushing him away, not wanting to listen. When the knight offered to at least send a gift, the prince only looked at him in annoyance. He was pushed out of the tent by force, but the knight stopped for a moment and looked around, realizing that the prince still managed to sleep a little if he was in such a good mood. Walking along the corridor, the maids talked among themselves about the condition of the young duchess. They were very worried about this, but also began to shun themselves that they had not noticed how good their lady was in character before. However, there was one whom Lillian's charisma didn't work for, and that was Rita Havis, Alan's younger sister. That the girl did not ask to do, but the maid treated her rather coldly, even despite her illness. The lady even said that she would never argue with Rita, and she took it as a compliment. Lillian did not understand when it was she who praised the maid, and she replied that if the lady admits her defeat, then it was a compliment. That's how her brother taught her. Then the young lady said that the servant was not behaving like a maid, and this surprised the girl, because she thought that such behavior, on the contrary, was welcomed by the lady, so she tried her best. Then the young duchess thought, which the maid herself likes, but she said that it is not quite so, because if she is fired, then she will have to run about her brother's small tasks. For a moment, she was distracted from thinking about her relatives and thought about her incurable disease. In the original story, Lillian was not sick with it, but died by committing suicide, but not because of the disease. The girl thought that the disease could have manifested itself because of the heat, because the news of the engagement reminded her of the tragic fate of her heroine. She thought that then, losing consciousness, she reluctantly invested magic in order not to repeat the fate of the heroine. She wondered when, in such a case, her end would come. Rita tried to draw the lady's attention to her by saying that she could not sleep yet. She had to eat first, but the girl said that she was very sleepy. If the maid did not let the lady fall asleep, but she quickly fell asleep. The maid did not try to wake her up, thinking that the lady was nice after all. However, it was not possible to skip a meal. After that, Rita told the situation to the housekeeper that Lillian had spent an hour for a piece of omelette. This upset the woman. The housekeeper and the maid told the doctor about everything, but Shaw listened to them and did not understand what he could do about it at the moment. Shaw said that the lady's reluctance to eat was due to her illness, because she did not have enough energy even to digest food. Rita asked what to do then, to which the doctor replied that the only option was to feed the lady little by little what she liked, but the maid was worried that the lady could refuse this too. The doctor said that in this case a disaster could happen. The women glared at him, thinking he was joking, but Shaw assured him it was true. The maid assured that she did not reward the doctor with such a look. He noticed that Rita looked more like a lady's bodyguard than a maid. The maid assured that she was serving the young lady because it was better than helping her brother. Nevertheless, she warned Shaw not to refer to Lillian as a disaster. The girl's brother visited while she was sleeping. The maid was also nearby. The boy admired his sister because in a dream she looked like a child. Cedric asked how long his sister had been asleep. The woman replied that it was long enough, so it was possible to wake her up already. The young man approached to wake up the girl. The girl caught his hand and leaned in. This moved the boy, and he asked if it was possible to let his sister sleep a little more, but the housekeeper replied that the girl should have eaten a long time ago. The head was upset, but there was nothing to do, so he started to wake up his sister. But when he saw how she was holding his hand tightly in his sleep, he could not take this step. Hearing his voice, the girl woke up. Her brother apologized for waking her up, but she was glad to see him. Cedric noticed that his sister looked lively, and the girl refused. That Winston said it was good for her to sleep a long time. The brother did not object. The guy also said that he had brought gifts for his sister, and calling Rita, pointed to a whole basket of peaches. The housekeeper asked where the head got so many of them. The boy said that he had heard a story that these fruits gave a longer life, so they were highly valued. The housekeeper cut the peaches and gave them to the lady to taste. Everyone held their breath while the girl tried it, and when she said it was delicious, they breathed a sigh of relief. The girl asked for another piece, and the brother couldn't help but remember how he was told that vitality mostly depended on the will to live. He squeezed his hands, glad that his sister liked the peaches. The chief thought that if he could at least extend her life for a year, it would be good. Cedric wanted Lillian to live. A month later, Grand Duke Hemenrin presented the Islar family with 1,200 peach trees. To this, the Duke replied that he had not yet given anything to the lady in honor of the betrothal. The girl remembered the necklace given by the Duke, but remained silent and only thanked for the trees. But the brother only got angry at such a gift and went away to talk to the man. In the room, the girl began to think that after all, the heroine was able to change the course of events from the original story, but from now on, she cannot interfere in the plot so madly. She understood that if she tries to correct even minor mistakes, then everything can change. The girl wrote down that the most important event going forward at the moment was the death of the Grand Duke, which happened in the 7th year of Claude's reign. Lillian would very much like to change that, but it couldn't be avoided. After his death, Matteo was kidnapped. During the liberation of his nephew, Daman loses an eye, but in addition, this event causes him mental damage. At this point, the young Duchess made a promise to herself that this was exactly what she had to change. 7 years have passed. 7 years of the reign of Emperor Claude have come. Autumn. Lillian turned 19, and the servant could not believe that time had passed so quickly. The servants worked hard to achieve this result. The maid only thought that the lady could do with a little improvement. However, now I did not want to upset the girl once again, because she was already experiencing the unfortunate recent events. She could not forget the last words of the Duke, because he was glad that at the end of his life he managed to meet her. He left his life happy, and Lillian could not help but see him on his last journey. The maid came to the lady to support her and told her to continue to be strong. The girl smiled. In recent years, many people around her shared their love with her, and she reciprocated, so she had nothing to regret. Now was not the time to cry, but now was the right time for her to act. The lady began to plan her plan of action, because in about a week, in the imperial conch town, the crown prince will be kidnapped. Over the past 7 years, Claude I has strengthened his position as emperor. People stopped perceiving him as a principled fratricide. They are used to him. Nevertheless, there was something that was really not enough for him: legal rights to the throne. First, the emperor will plan to use the loyal servant Eliza Wood. Claude needs the prince to give up his rights voluntarily and not to kill him first. However, he will not succeed, because the crown prince is serious, so the second plan will be to kidnap and kill Matteo and make Daman the murderer. Of course, this will not work for the emperor either, But in the course of events, her fiancé will receive a severe psychological injury and lose an eye, so she wanted to go on stage before that. The girl thought that it might actually help their strategic marriage. Suddenly she thought. In the book, it was said that there was a magical tunnel between Kontakun and Islar's house, so her family and the imperial court maintained good neighborly relations. She understood that with such an opportunity, she simply could not afford to fail, but she had to come up with a plan to get to Konktown. Once her brother flew into her room. The boy was worried that his sister had been eating badly again lately. The girl said that she simply lost her appetite. Cedric wanted to start convincing her, to which the girl said that this could be the reason for such a cold. The brother suggested building a greenhouse, but the sister did not want to cause so much trouble, so she hinted that she would like to go somewhere warm to rest. The chief began to worry more about this, and the girl understood what her brother meant, because she knew that she would not have enough strength for a long trip. This situation made Cedric even more desperate. He understood that the trip would not change her illness in any way, but it could help support her current condition. Alan offered to send the lady to Konktown, because they had a place there, but the head did not see the point in this, because this place was right under the nose of the emperor. The knight said that it might even be for the best, because until the engagement was made public, Lillian was not an important person in the palace. The girl's brother thought. The assistant also reminded about the magic tunnel through which the journey will take no more than 2 hours. Otherwise, it is scary to think that on the way, the lady will constantly have to refill the tank. Shaw took the floor for a moment and said that even jewelry with stones is a burden on the lady, so there was no way she would agree to a trip with a huge budget. However, the doctor did not expect that Lillian would gladly accept the offer to go to Konktown. For the trip, the girl was fully packed so that she definitely did not need anything. Rita entered the room, and the lady asked her if she was moving somewhere. The maid replied that all these things will be necessary for the girl. Suddenly, she noticed a casket among the things and wondered what it was. After examining the casket, the girl was amazed that her brother had opened the Ishalel gate for her trip. In these gates, even before the appearance of the Isler family on these lands, the most diverse treasures were collected. What was stored behind those gates was not documented anywhere. Of course, no one took anything away from there. She did not understand why she would give something so precious to someone who would soon leave the premises. The girl hoped that there would be nothing special there. When she opened it, she saw a cradle. The doctor came into the room and said that it was his idea, so that the lady would spend her time on the road with benefit. Through this tube, she could vaporize herbs and inhale the steam. Noticing the lady's doubt, the doctor immediately warned her that this tube was handed over to her in full power, so if she wanted to refuse, she could only throw it away. The girl was a little upset that her brother pulled such a scam, but he didn't even show himself. Clouds began to gather outside, and Cedric wanted his sister to stay at home today. The girl smiled and told her brother that there was no need to worry, because she would pass through the magic tunnel quickly. In her mind, she understood that only today can the following events be corrected. The boy understood that nothing bad should have happened, because this tunnel was laid back in the times of the magical era, through which the Imperial Army could get to Turin in 2 hours. Finally, he hugged his sister tightly, and they said goodbye. For a moment, he turned to the knight and warned Dunkel not to let a single hair fall from his sister's head. Noticing that the sister was dressed in a considerable number of clothes, Cedric lifted her in his arms and personally carried her to the carriage. While they were riding in the carriage, the lady managed to get some sleep. After a while, Rita reported that they were almost there. For further sleep, the girl refused, lighting a pipe. Upon arrival, Dunkel said that they would take the lady to the Hiss estate itself, but the girl refused and said that she still had to go to Terran Street. The girl hoped that everything went according to plan. She even bought tickets to the theater so that in case of anything, she could say that she was just going to the play. Unexpectedly, the carriage stopped abruptly, and the girl was thrown back a little on the seat. The maid was worried if the lady was all right, but Lillian did not answer and ordered Rita to open the door. The knight had already stepped forward, but the girl ordered him to retreat. Dunkel still resisted this, but Milady's tone was too convincing. The knight could not believe that in front of him was still the same fragile and quiet girl. The guard apologized and moved out of the way. The lady got out of the carriage and stood opposite the wounded stranger. The stranger began to approach Milady, but the knight wanted to stop him, and the opponent was about to strike, but Lillian stopped him. The stranger listened to her and lowered his hand, looking at her. The girl introduced herself and wanted to calm him down. However, she did not have time to finish, and the guy started to fall forward. The knight managed to catch him, but said that he should report this homeless person to the security. However, the lady said to take him to the carriage. At the knight's objection, she said that before him was not a homeless person, but the prince of the empire. The knight was greatly surprised by the news. The lady sobered up the boy and told him to quickly carry the prince into the carriage. They couldn't know what was wrong with him, but judging by his appearance, something was serious. Dunkel was somewhat surprised. It looked as if the lady knew what was about to happen. Lillian quickly got into the carriage and ordered the coachman to drive faster. In the carriage, the lady met Rita's condemning look. The girl promised to explain everything so that it looked like the truth. The girl looked at the maid, in the hope that after hearing the lie, she would calm down or trust and silently follow her. It became worrying whether Rita was really on her side. In a moment, the maid said that there was no need to explain anything. The lady was satisfied with the answer, so she asked the maid to help take care of the prince. The maid immediately started looking for towels. However, the maid was still unhappy that she did not know the prince's plans for the lady, so she said that she would kill His Majesty herself. Lillian wanted to give way to the maid, but the prince came to his senses and quickly grabbed the lady's hand, asking who was in front of him. The lady introduced herself again, but was met only with a questioning look from the prince and quickly realized that he must not have recognized her, but there was nothing she could do about it. An ancient mind-controlling weapon was used to defeat Daman. After being hit by him, the prince's consciousness went into a stupor and it will take a long time to recover. However, in the original story, the prince never managed to fully recover, and Lillian's death ultimately destroyed him. The carriage stopped again. The lady understood that it was not correct to ask such a thing when he first saw her, but clarified how much he was willing to allow to save his life. He looked at her questioningly again, and in a moment he fainted. Lillian said that time was short, so she decided to take it as an agreement to everything. They were stopped by a squad of guards to inspect the carriage. The lady calmly lit her pipe without hurrying to open the door. It became interesting that the guards did not pay attention to the fact that the coat of arms of Turin was on her carriage. One of the guards approached and said that no exceptions were made for anyone. Dunkel wanted to intercede for the ruffian, but the lady gave a sign that the knight should not get hot. One of the guards stepped forward, reporting that they were in Kanktown territory and were carrying out the emperor's orders. Milady raised her voice, saying that it was rather strange to order a coach from Turin to be inspected, which was not even inspected on entry. The girl said to show the badge so that she would believe them. The guard took out the badge without hesitation. Dunkel was surprised to see the badge of the Knightly Order of the Defenders of the Capital. The guard again ordered the door to be opened to inspect the carriage. In a moment, the lady gave permission to open the door. The guards approached and immediately retreated when they saw a girl calmly smoking a pipe in front of them. The guard turned away, for it felt as if he had burst into the bedroom of a lady who had just woken up. He apologized and said that they had been told about a homeless person nearby. The girl assured that she was not angry with them because they were only doing their job. She said with a deliberate scowl that it was cool outside, making it clear that the door should be closed. When the guards left, the girl breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Rita. The maid wanted to say something to this performance of the lady, but remained silent. At that, Lillian left, revealing the prince, whom she had been hiding under her dress. Looking at him, I thought about it and thought that they usually say, "wanted by the Empire" about such people. She was looking at him too intently, and the prince noticed it. He stood up a little. The lady kept looking at him and thought that the prince was really handsome after all. Noticing that they were still staring at him, he remarked about it. Lillian apologized. Without thinking, she just said that he had beautiful eyes. The prince was a little taken aback by this, so he asked if the lady had said it sincerely. The girl assured that it was sincere. Damien thought about this, that he was given a compliment without extra thoughts. In a moment, the carriage stopped again, and screams were heard outside. It was the guards again who wanted to inspect the carriage, but the lady knights wouldn't let them. The prince leaned towards her, noticing that she was agitated, but reassured her, saying that there was no reason to worry because he was the strongest here. Of course she knew about it, but the problem was different. According to the plot, the prince took on the attack of the ancient weapon. He should now be suffering from the consequences, but he was too cheerful for some reason. Outside, the two camps of knights were still arguing. Dunkel did not allow them to check the carriage because they did not have the right to do so. The prince came out and knocked the enemy guard off his feet with the door. He was sick of listening to all these conversations, so he decided to find out for himself. The prince began to mercilessly beat the guard, but no one dared to stand up for him. In the end, the knight himself noticed someone in front of him. He was not given the opportunity to ask anything more, and the prince ordered to give him a sword, but it is not known to whom he actually addressed. As soon as Dunkel thought about it, everyone around, in cloaks, immediately bowed their heads to the prince. Without any objection, one of the group gave the prince his sword. Damien quickly unsheathed the one, and in one fell swoop took out the Imperial Lifeguard. Lillian looked out from the carriage and saw this whole picture. Her knight rushed to her to hide so that the lady would not see anything. The prince bowed silently beside the carriage. He handed her the cradle, which fell out of the carriage after apologizing for the situation, which must have frightened the lady. She exhaled, assuring that everything was fine. She needed to calm down, because the most important thing was to save the prince. She succeeded. It was strange that he was too cheerful, but she decided to take it as luck. The girl decided to do something else, so she offered the prince to go with her to Turin. Now it was necessary to leave this place quickly. Damien was a little surprised that the lady allowed him to ride in her carriage, but she didn't understand what the problem was. The guy did not say anything to this and agreed to her proposal. As the carriage drove off, the girl was relieved to think that fortunately, the prince did not find their meeting suspicious, but to explain that they were driving past and came upon him sounded strange. The prince, in turn, now thought that the lady was worried about what she had recently seen. He decided to change the subject and thank her for saving him. She replied that she had not done anything like that. The prince began to look at her intently, and Lillian thought that he was worried about the wounds. His Majesty said that he was not so badly injured, he was just tired. Instead, I wanted to make one suggestion. The girl was worried that she would be asked how she found him, but the prince only said that he would also like to thank her in some way. Magic is the basis of human life. If someone with magic wishes to go beyond their physical capabilities, Thera adjusts the body according to the owner's wishes. As for Damien, he didn't just possess magic and a sufficient supply of Thera. He was born with a volume of magical energy so colossal that he was unable to control it himself. With such power, by the standards of ordinary people, he was almost a monster. Damien suffered from an overflow of Theras from birth. However, with age, the number of incidents decreased, but when he lost his temper, he caused chaos. The prince was surprised that the lady said that she had not done anything like that for him, because if it were not for her, he might even have died. The boy was looking intently at the girl. She blinked, not understanding what was the matter, but in the end the young man turned away and thought that everything was going to the point that he would tear out his eyes so as not to see terrible visions. The despair of the visions, while he was unconscious, seemed incredible. When it seemed that everything was about to go into the abyss, she appeared, and with a light touch of her hand brought him out of his nightmares. For him, she became the same ray of light in the blinding darkness of terrible visions. The lady snapped him out of his thoughts because she still didn't understand what he meant by thanking. She explained that she was there by accident, so she should thank fate, not her. She stopped abruptly because she thought of something. The lady realized that now was the time to ask for it, but did not understand why the atmosphere was so tense. Without taking his eyes off Lillian, the prince made a seductive gesture and asked if she would give him the opportunity to thank her. The lady silently shook her head. He asked what he could do for her in that case. The girl was silent for a moment, and then asked to destroy this magical tunnel. Thanks to this passage between Turin and Canticune, the Imperial army could reach them in 2 hours. It's like rolling out a red carpet for the Emperor's henchmen. She understood that it was impossible to give the Emperor such an opportunity, so for her alliance with the prince, it would be the best option if the tunnel did not happen. The prince was a little surprised and asked why Mr. Terinsky should not do this. The girl replied that her brother would not have the strength for it. The lady saw that the prince was in no hurry to agree, but she did not insist, saying that if he did not want to, he could refuse. She asked again if he could do it. The prince turned away, pondering this, and then laughed softly. Damien was sure that the girl didn't know him well if she asked if he was capable of destroying the tunnel. He wondered if fulfilling her request would satisfy the lady, and if a smile would light up the girl's face afterwards. He covered his face with his hands, still not giving an answer to her question, and just lost himself in his memories. The boy remembered how the Grand Duke had come to him and complained unhappily that someone like Damien was lucky enough to receive the blessing of such a lady. In the end, he answered the girl. Of course he could do it, because almost after birth he destroyed the device for measuring Thera. He smiled and promised that he would at least try if the Savior asked for it. For himself, He was sure that he would easily cope with it. Level Infinity was awarded to Damien Rufenbein, as well as the Sword of the Imperial Family. However, if less officially, then Monster of the Empire. The measuring tool burst when trying to measure the prince's terabytes. It was an unprecedented case. This happened for the first time, but no one knew what it could lead to. Then the emperor thought that it would be easier to kill the child. However, he was only a baby, so he was given a chance and told to become a sword for his older brother. If he copes with this task, he will be able to stay alive. He came to this battlefield not because his father said so, not because he wanted to live, and not because he wanted to please his ego. It was just perfectly normal to be a monster on the battlefield. At home, he was greeted as a hero, and he wondered how much longer this would continue. The people seemed simple-minded and naive to him. In the palace, the emperor was only angry because Damien showed no desire to occupy the throne. Then he thought a little about it, because he just got bored. However, the emperor was annoyed by his son's frivolity regarding such a serious request, but the young man knew that if he did not tell, they would not believe him. Therefore, he knew that it was better to choose an answer that would simply please his father. However, standing in front of the emperor's coffin, he admitted that he truly wished for only one thing, that everything would end in general destruction. He really wanted to destroy this fragile world, fold it like origami, and then destroy it. That is exactly what he would like to say then. When he left and got ready to leave, his brother stopped him. He praised the younger man for trying, but Damien didn't think it was worth the praise, to which the elder assured that the younger had really done a lot for the empire. Without a doubt, he stepped into the tunnel. Only his stomp was heard around. The prince stopped for a moment and thought again. He remembered how before, when he was sitting wrapped in a shirt, his brother came and said that he had read some ancient scriptures and asked if the younger one was interested in listening. Damien there rudely told his brother to shut his mouth. The elder was a little disappointed, but in the end decided to continue. Despite his brother's refusal, he still read that if the younger man met someone with a Terry deficiency, they would be able to restore each other's balance. Then he thought that it was nonsense, but his brother promised that he would find such a person and asked Damien not to die until that moment and to hold on as best he could. However, even now the boy did not really believe in these words. There was no point in torturing himself anymore. He no longer wanted to believe in a miracle and hope. That's what he thought until the last events, until he met Lillian, but he still couldn't believe that it could be true. The prince was still sure that if he got out of this tunnel, he would once again face the irreparable reality, because he was a monster from birth, and nothing had changed. However, some part of him still hoped that all this could be true. Then he remembered Lillian's face. Suddenly he realized that everything was because of her, because he wanted to fulfill her request, to surprise her. He wants to see her rejoice and praise him. The young man turned to his brother again, remembering how he had told him not to lose his mind. But it seemed to Damien that his mind had already floated away, because he could not think about anything else, only how to fulfill the lady's request. It seemed to him quite fortunate that the lady's request concerned what he did best. The young man swung and unleashed a stream of energy. Meanwhile, Cedric rushed to meet his sister as hard as he could. He scolded himself for letting her go because he thought it would be safe. He galloped around thinking that the death of his father and the Grand Duke was the last thing that could happen, but he quickly realized that he was wrong. When a stuffed dunkel ran to the manor, the head only met him calmly, but in a moment, he was informed that something bad had happened to Milady. The boy jumped up just as his sister was getting out of the carriage. Lillian did not expect to see her brother here, and was very surprised to hear his voice. Cedric threw himself into her arms. The brother's body rose and fell with difficulty. The boy was happy to see his sister alive, but the girl just kept silent because she could not tell the truth. She was sure that even if she did tell, there was no way her brother would approve of her plan, so this was the only solution. The lady hugged him too, and mentally apologized. The girl began to assure that everything was fine with her. Cedric let out a sigh of relief, but still did not let go of his sister's embrace. Suddenly, Alan turned to him, turning his head in the direction of the magic tunnel. The boy wanted to tell the assistant to take his sister away and hide her. However, he did not have time to finish, and an explosion was heard nearby, and the ground around him began to shake. After that, a cloud of fire and smoke rose into the sky. The boy could not understand what was happening. Magical energy was clearly felt in the air. There was a lot of smoke in front of them, but something was beginning to be seen there. He began to notice the figure of a man, but suddenly felt a strong, overwhelming power. Whoever was there, he was more dangerous than an entire army and quickly surrounded his sister. Lillian stopped her brother and prevented him from attacking the prince. Everyone around suddenly fell silent. Daman knelt down in front of her and, leaning against the hem of her dress, announced that he had fulfilled her request by paying the debt, so now he wanted to ask her for something. Looking up, he offered to become his wife. The girl looked at him somewhat surprised. The girl could not stop being surprised by this attitude of the prince, because in the novel, Daman was indifferent to his wife. Lillian did not know poverty, but the only thing she could not get was the attention of her husband. The girl frowned a little, asking if that was why he was smiling so brightly at her, and she didn't miss a beat. He mentally begged her forgiveness for using this moment as a trick to be able to touch her hand. What's more, I even wanted to be a little greedy and for her to touch him, petted and praised like a kitten. Although he understood that he was losing his mind, there was nothing he could do. In the carriage, the prince simply held her hand, and his curse was lifted. His hands began to tremble, and he thought that if the lady touched his head, then perhaps his excruciating headache would also disappear. The only thing he wanted now was to touch the girl to make sure that all this was reality and to make sure of it. Daman would like to see her reaction before the lady's brother comes to his senses. If she accepts his proposal, that alone would make him happy for the rest of his life. However, Lillian could not answer his question and only apologized because her head suddenly began to spin. In a moment, she fainted. The prince did not expect this, but he was ready to catch her. But Cedric quickly grabbed his sister's hand and pulled her to him, leaving the prince to look on in surprise. The head took his sister in his arms and ordered to quickly open the door of the carriage. Daman was still looking at the lady in surprise, not believing that humans could be so easy. Looking at her barely conscious girl breathing heavily, he still in the carriage thought that in her condition she still dared to travel. Watching her being carried into the carriage, he understood that she had ventured on the trip not for fun, but for recovery. The prince did not expect that the lady felt so bad. He was brought out of his thoughts when he heard the coachman driving the horses. Looking at his hands, he realized that Lillian had been taken from him. He laughed sweetly, and it somewhat frightened the nearby knights. The situation seemed funny to him, although everyone understood that there was nothing funny here. At home, the girl was examined by a doctor and informed that her condition was unstable, but the head was not surprised by this. What she had already experienced with the emperor's guards was enough, so the prince also forced her to watch the murder of a man. So after all, the prince innocently asked for his sister's hand in marriage. This infuriated Cedric even more. The doctor said that first it would be necessary to return the lost Terra to the lady. The head agreed and began the procedure, but suddenly realized that the sister did not accept his power. The boy began to get nervous, not understanding what the matter was. Shaw thought for a moment, then asked if the lady had met someone new recently. The doctor explained that the new acquaintance had a more suitable energy, so it was necessary to find him immediately. Cedric glared at him. The man noticed that the head was somewhat upset by what he heard, because someone approached his sister, but for now there was no other choice but to heal the lady. The chapter asked everyone where this stranger could be. The boy did not really want to answer, but there was nothing to do. She finally opened her eyes, but the room was still a blur. She saw a man's figure and was surprised that her brother did not help her up. She immediately came to her senses, realizing that she was too much used to her brother's care, so she quickly got up herself and saw the prince in front of her. Rita immediately rushed to the lady and threw a robe over her. The girl thought that her appearance somewhat confused the prince, so he could not answer her. The lady asked the maid to close the curtains. The brother came to the bed, and Daman told him that the lady was starting to feel much better, but the head still blamed the prince for what had happened to his sister. The prince looked at Cedric and immediately noticed that he and Lillian were very similar on the outside, but completely different on the inside. The lady was much kinder. Nevertheless, the prince could see that the family ties between these two were very strong, so there was no choice but to suffer. Still, he was sure that Lillian would take him under his wing in the near future. Daman smiled benevolently and apologized for not being polite enough and calling him brother-in-law. He did not want a bad relationship with the lady's brother to spoil their relationship. As soon as Cedric was nicknamed brother-in-law, silence reigned in the room, which turned into a tense atmosphere. The doctor stopped the boys until it turned into a fight. He also turned to the prince and told him that the lady was suffering from a lack of thera. Before that, her brother helped her, but now it is impossible. Now they needed his help because the lady had finally met someone whose energy was more suited to her. The prince was surprised. He liked this information quite a bit, because it meant that not only he needed Lillian, she needed him too. Damien again approached the bed and asked the girl for her hand, but she did not answer. The silence dragged on, and the prince began to worry. He remembered her brother talking about his sudden proposal, so he thought it weighed on the lady. He thought that she did not like that he had made such a proposal when he was not in his right mind. But if that was not the case, then he thought that she did not want him because the prince was too handsome. The prince knew that such ladies existed, the same Marianne, but he did not want to believe that Lillian was the same. The boy could not think that this could be the reason, because he believed that being beautiful was only for the best. Even on the battlefield, the enemies were shocked by his beauty. He could not understand why the lady did not love him in such a case, when suddenly the girl spoke and immediately apologized for causing him trouble. The boy did not expect to hear this, and although he assured that it was not so, the girl just kept silent about it without explaining anything. Indifference was the most passive form of dislike. The prince, from Lillian's memories of the past, did not like her at all and did not even look at her. Not to say that she was unhappy, but the heroine's body and soul craved attention, which she never received. Therefore, she firmly decided for herself that she would not repeat the fate of the heroine, and therefore, in order to maintain at least some kind of relationship with the prince, she would try not to add to his troubles. Nevertheless, she understood that at the moment there was no other way, because if she dies, then there will be no blood connection between their families. Besides, I thought, that her refusal might anger the prince more. Finally, she reached through her cape. Touching her hand, Damien could not contain his joy, because finally what he wanted so much happened. After that, he didn't want to let her go at all, but glancing at her brother, he quickly realized that these were just hasty wishes. The boy apologized for his behavior and, concentrating, began to hand the girl the Terra. Now he felt what the breath of life felt like. He had never needed to dose the energy before because it was boring and long, but this allowed the prince to hold her hand longer. At this time, Lillian thought that she was taking up too much of the prince's time. The prince's body felt much more comfortable, and she began to drift off to sleep. The girl wanted to say something. That this is enough, but Damien asked her not to take this time from him. She did not understand why she was falling asleep so much, but she firmly decided to ask the prince to stop, because she felt better, to which the prince replied that he was not better yet, so he wanted to stay like that for a while. He told her to just continue to lie like that, and in a moment the girl began to close her eyes, falling asleep, and the boy wished her good dreams. As soon as the lady fell asleep, Rita lightly pushed her way to the bed, and the prince noticed Cedric's unfriendly look. However, he understood that he had to look at everything seriously, because now he could not help his sister, and only thanks to the prince she is better. Nevertheless, he annoyed him a lot. Stepping over himself, he thanked the prince for his help. He accepted the thanks and said that he was glad to help, because the head himself could not do it. Shaw examined the lady, and in a moment reported that she was even better than when Cedric was giving his blade. The doctor said that these two were perfect for each other, so it was worth rushing the wedding. The chief only became more angry at this and was asked what the matter was. Barely restraining his anger, the boy replied that nothing had happened. The prince looked at the head and, thinking a little, remarked to himself that there was a sweet side to it. In Cedric's office, the prince said that for the sake of Lillian's help, he hoped that the head would not kick him out of the palace, but the boy barely restrained himself from doing just that. Meanwhile, the lady had already come to her senses and was informed that the prince had graciously agreed to share the Terra with her. However, it seemed strange to her that the prince's energy made her more tired. Rita relayed the doctor's words that after receiving more fat, the body needs time to adjust to the new balance. Also, the maid handed the lady new medicinal herbs, and the girl immediately accepted them and started smoking a pipe. It seemed to Lillian that the concentration of the medicine had become less, but she could not stop smoking. A fair-haired young man suddenly entered the room and approached the lady's bed. The boy said that the herbs that the lady inhaled were quite weak, so they did not cause him any discomfort, but the girl still hid the pipe. The girl spoke that she could not afford to smoke in the presence of the crown prince. In the end, she asked what brought the young man to her. Matteo bowed to express his gratitude for the rescue. When he got up, he met the lady's worried look and thought he had bent the stick, but otherwise he couldn't. He remembered how he met his uncle's bride for the first time as a child. Then he quickly said hello, but hurried to get as far away from her as possible, because she strongly reminded him of his mother's image. And although it was a long time ago, he was still ashamed of that behavior. but he was sure that the lady had already forgotten about it. Lillian told him that the prince should not worry about it, because Damien had already done a great service for the Islar family. Matteo frowned a little at this, and said that by service, his uncle must have meant consent to the location in the outer tower. The lady was surprised at this. The girl was a little worried, but the prince immediately calmed her down and said that his uncle will feel great there. The prince understood that such a good lady could not help but worry, although he assured her otherwise. Suddenly, Lillian asked if she could meet Damien in person. In the study, Ivan did not hold back and shunned Cedric for almost sending the prince out into the street. Although the prince also considered the chapter somewhat abnormal, who rushed to his sister as soon as he heard that something might happen to her, but he too made mistakes. But now he did not pay attention to anything. In the end, the knight stopped complaining, because he noticed that the prince was indifferent, and for a moment it worried him, because it was not in the character of his majesty, so he asked what he had done so terrible. The prince only smiled slyly, which worried the knight even more. Matteo entered the room and told the assistant to calm down, because the prince had not done anything terrible. However, the knight did not want to calm down, because he still believed that Damien was guilty of something, but the crown prince finally silenced him with one sentence. Ivan apologized for his behavior, but looking back at the prince, he could not understand why he remained so calm, although at such a moment he usually grabbed his sword. Lillian also entered the room and asked the knight not to scold the prince too much. Besides saying that Damien had not said anything untrue, the assistant could not believe that such a bright girl was the prince's bride, but in a moment the meaning of her words came to him, and he understood that the whole story of their meeting was true. He imagined for a moment how the most powerful character in their empire was hiding in the carriage under the lady's skirt. It seemed abnormal. Suddenly the prince began to approach the lady, and the knight wanted to stop him, but did not have time. His Majesty innocently started talking to the girl, asking her how she was feeling, because he heard that she was getting better. The girl understood that her brother secretly forbade her to talk about her well-being, so she replied that she came personally to thank her for everything. However, Damien assured that on the contrary, he should thank her for saving him. The lady didn't say anything to this, only she became more depressed because in fact she only saved his eye, nothing more. She understood that the prince had done much more for her, so she could not accept so much gratitude just for saving his eye. The lady bowed slightly in thanks for everything. The prince invited her to sit down. The lady was still not feeling well, but she understood that her refusal would not be accepted, so she was forced to agree. She paid attention to the knight, because it seemed that she was seeing him for the first time. Isaac introduced himself and said, "Who was an assistant to the prince?" The girl also introduced herself. The knight looked at the lady again, and still could not understand how such a bright girl could be the prince's bride. In a moment, Damien directly began to speak for Matteo and Ivan to leave the room and let him and the lady speak alone. Leaving the room, the knight looked around and saw that the lady apologized for the trouble caused, although he believed that she should have worried about herself now. They went out on the veranda and brought them guests. The girl was already reaching for a glass, but the prince stopped her, telling her not to drink it because it is alcohol. The lady knew it was part of etiquette to serve alcohol, although she would have liked some tea and remembered the Lannister sisters, as she had not seen them for a long time. The girl was distracted and did not immediately hear the prince calling her. She apologized, and Damien informed her that he had no right to offer alcohol because the lady had not yet fully recovered. He offered to meet next time for a glass of this wonderful drink. The girl agreed, but felt a strange chill. The lady could not understand why the prince was so kind to her. If it continues like this in the future, then she could have misunderstood everything. But one should not forget that in front of her is a guy who is indifferent to Lillian's past. The girl did not hope for his love. She only wanted them to be at least partners who would fulfill their duties. She was afraid that if she wanted more, everything would surely collapse, so she had no right to be greedy in order not to cause even more trouble to her loved ones. The prince brought her out of her thoughts again by reminding her that she had promised to thank him. The lady listened attentively. Then the prince asked to give him an answer to his proposal. The lady did not immediately listen and wanted to apologize for his stay, but when she came to her senses, she did not believe that the offer was not a joke. Lillian reminded him that they had already exchanged marriage papers. The prince confirmed, but said that the wedding was their personal business, so he wanted to hear the answer. The girl replied that it was 7 years ago, to which the prince replied that she was 12 then, and he was 17 and he could already make certain decisions. But at that time, it was too early for her to think about marriage. The lady replied that nothing had changed since then, for even then she was Turin's daughter and a member of the Islar family, and Turin's will was hers. The prince already understood that the lady was serious, but asked if tomorrow the will changed so that they broke off the marriage, then whether she would agree to it. Lillian looked up at him and replied that she owed her comfortable life to her lineage, so marrying for Turin was her duty. Then from asked the last question whether her country will decide the fate of this marriage. The girl objected and said that this relationship would be for life, so she also thought a lot about it. The prince was interested in the lady's answer, so he asked her what exactly she was thinking. The girl replied that she had heard that the prince did not abuse those who were weaker. Damien expected to hear something else, but the lady didn't know what else to say. He wanted to know what else were the criteria of a good man in a lady. The girl understood that the prince wanted to agree on certain terms of the contract in advance, but it was for the best. Lillian began to emphasize that the prince should not be fond of gambling and not spend too much time with other ladies, and if he did, then that there should be no illegitimate children. The prince was disappointed and asked if the lady would use these rules herself. The girl did not understand what he meant. The girl thought for a moment and replied that she would gladly follow these rules as well. However, the prince thought about it as if the lady had nothing against getting to know other men better. Having understood what the prince was leading to, the girl immediately replied that she did not seek meetings on the side. She simply did not want to limit him because their marriage was strategic. To this, the prince immediately replied that the lady should not respect his freedom in this way, because he did not want such respect from her. The lady did not immediately understand what the prince was talking about, and the boy explained that he would not want such a relationship because it was a marriage anyway. Besides, if their marriage was strategic, then it was necessary to be even more careful because many lives depended on it. The girl thought about it and finally agreed. He went on to say that luckily neither of them was interested in an extramarital relationship, so he suggested adding that clause to the contract. The prince immediately began to think of what punishment to come up with for someone who breaks the rule, but the lady did not understand why they were doing all this. His Majesty carefully wrote down everything in a document and handed it over to the lady to read, and at the same time voiced everything. He was somewhat glad that of all the men in the empire, he fit Lillian's criteria the best. The girl agreed with him, and the prince decided to end the meeting there. The lady did not understand what was the matter, but she thought that for the future it would be better not to be alone with him. They said goodbye, and the prince apologized for not being able to escort the lady to the exit. The girl was not offended and quietly left. When she left, the prince became serious and took his hand from the table, where a crumb was visible under it. The boy realized that it was close. He rarely saw her anyway, because her brother did not allow him to do so, and yet he could not believe that just by looking at her, all his blood would boil with desire. He exhaled heavily in understanding that an equals sign could be placed between a war hero and a murderer, and although it was not visible from the side, he was more terrible than the murderer. He wondered if Lillian would marry him knowing everything about him, but he answered his own question and swore never to tell, lest she leave him. As soon as she left the prince's room, Alan and Rita were waiting for her outside. The lady hoped that she managed to get out of the room unnoticed, but she quickly realized that she was wrong. However, she was surprised that the knight also came for her, and the boy said that the head found out about everything, but this did not surprise the lady. The knight led the lady behind him, saying that the chief was already waiting for her. The girl was a little surprised that her brother was finally free, but the maid replied that today was the gathering day, so everything was not quite right. Alan said that only a lady is allowed to see her brother at any time, and the girl understood that Cedric wanted to scold her for meeting the prince. Lillian did not have time to enter the office when her brother immediately rushed to her with the offer to think over everything about her wedding once again. The girl did not understand what was the matter because they exchanged marriage contracts a long time ago. The brother understood that because of this it would be difficult to dissolve the marriage, but he still wanted it. The girl tried to calm her brother so that he would explain why he so abruptly wanted to end the marriage. He was silent for a moment and then told his sister that he had received a letter of invitation. The invitation was from Rachel Wood. Lillian already knew that this woman was a cunning strategist and enjoyed the special love of Claude I, and also had the most influence in the entire empire. It was she who was suspected of organizing the overthrow of the previous emperor. While the Empress betrayed the memory of her dead husband, Rachel, on the contrary, was in plain sight and enlisted the support of the nobility. The fact that this lady paid attention to Lillian only meant that she was now her target. Cedric was even more disappointed and said that after the conflict when the sister first came into the world, Blanchette betrayed the Grand Duke, but now he seemed to have gained courage. The brother turned to her again and said that after the death of the Duke, the easiest way to destroy the alliance that was supposed to protect the Crown Prince was to destroy Lillian to prevent this marriage from happening. The last words were spoken by the lady herself because she already understood the intentions of the enemies. They had already gotten rid of the previous head of their family, so destroying their daughter was not a problem. Nevertheless, the girl assured that it will be impossible to dissolve the marriage without corresponding consequences. According to the novel, she knew that one way or another the future emperor would still become emperor, so she did not know if he would be able to forgive Turin's betrayal. She turned to her brother, though he begged him not to reassure him, but her sister said that the Turians were always faithful and brave, a little hard-nosed, but just as selfless and honest. The lady continued and said that even when she married and left Turin, her children would be born outside these lands, but Lillian's heart would always belong to this place. Cedric stared at his sister for a while, but eventually understood. That cannot be refused. He only spoke that he could not afford to lose her, to which the lady replied that this is why he needs to let her go, and reinforced it by the fact that she still needs to get Thera all the time. She said that she will not be able to live if she does not marry the prince, because only he can help her. The brother was even more disappointed and began to assure that Shaw would find a way out. The girl approached the table and quietly said that even the doctor would not be able to find a way out. However, Lillian did not stop looking at everything positively and said that she would do everything so that she would be respected, give life to the new prince, and do her best to raise her grandchildren. In the end, the brother realized that even their father would not be able to convince the sister with her current determination. The lady smiled. Without stopping to smile, the lady said that she would live long and happily, because like other brides, Lillian could only do one thing in this situation, not to lose hope for a bright future. The Great Negotiations is an event aimed at reminding the ruler of each region of his loyalty to the crown, because each of them had an army and power that needed to be kept under control. Everything about armies, trade, farming, and laws was also discussed there. New alliances were created here, but this year this event will be more luxurious because it was held during the 7th year of the reign of Claude. At this event, both supporters of the emperor and his enemies will be present, so Matteo could only hope that everything would not come to war. It still seems strange to him that his father wanted him to become emperor just because he was his son. However, all these were only illusions, because the father was dead, the crown did not shine on him, and the mother became the wife of his uncle. He would like to give up everything that was left, but he remembered how the Grand Duke was only angry with him because of it. The Duke gave the example of Claude, who killed many people for the sake of power, and accused Matteo that he was only looking for a better way out for himself. If the crown prince really wanted to die, then he should have become the emperor first and have an heir. Scrolling through these memories in his head, the prince really wanted to be alone, so he couldn't find a better place than the library. He did not have time to enter when he saw Lillian, who was quietly reading a book while holding her pipe in her hand. The first thing that came to mind was that the lady did not at all look like a weak lady who needed help. The prince started a conversation and asked if she was hiding from someone. The lady offered to sit next to him, and the prince did not refuse. I noticed about myself that she was very lightly dressed, although I heard that she was quite ill. When she covered her mouth for a moment, the prince offered to take her into the room, but the girl politely refused. Then he offered her his jacket, and she gratefully accepted it, and in a moment began to concentrate on reading again. Matteo decided to start the conversation again and asked about the rumor that this year's Grand Talks was her big world debut. The lady confirmed. She decided to take advantage of this opportunity because all the girls her age had already made their debuts, so Lillian was even a little late. The prince noticed that in such a case she needed to prepare. The girl replied that it was for this reason that she was hiding in the library. Her answer made the prince laugh. In a moment, the crown prince apologized for the trouble this invitation had caused. The big talks included 2 rounds of talks, as well as 5 takeaways from various meetings. Lillian, who was in poor health, had to prepare seriously so as not to appear weak on the battlefield. In addition, this time it was not the Empress who opened the negotiations, but Mrs. Rachel. She completely supplanted the mistress and brazenly put her name on display. In addition, in this crazy place, Lillian would show everyone for the first time that she was the prince's bride. So Matteo was sure that the lady would blame him. The girl was surprised to hear an apology from the prince, and it seemed interesting to her that he blamed himself for what had happened. So she began to wonder if it really wasn't Lady Rachel, and the prince sent her an invitation. The guy denied. Then the girl asked if he killed her father. The young man fell silent. Without waiting for his answer, the lady finally said that if he apologized, then his apology was accepted, but said that one should not apologize for something he did not do. The prince understood that there was no truth about the children about his family, because there was complete disorder. However, the lady therefore asked if it was his fault. The boy again apologized for his simple-mindedness, considering it a vice, to which the girl asked if in this case he thought that his father was also vice. The young man did not know what to say to that. Although his father emperor was simple-minded and kind, he could not say anything bad about it. Even the Grand Duke did not consider his father's naivety to be something simple, because he entrusted his son to Damien for a reason. And although he was not very interested in the fate of ordinary people, he definitely wanted to protect his son. As if reading his thoughts, Lillian replied that her father was not like that either. No matter which side he chose, he would have an enemy in the face of the other side. Nevertheless, he was loyal to the emperor and all of Turin to the end, and met his death with his head held high. The lady meant that she didn't lose her father to the crown prince. It was just that her father, like his, only had two sides, and only one could emerge victorious. The young man wanted to say something to this, but the girl said that her father was a worthy man, and she was sure that the emperor was the same. Looking at the prince, the lady smiled and said that it was not worth adding guilt to the emotional wounds, because it would only get worse. The boy was moved by her words. He realized that at some point it became convenient for him to blame himself, because he could not bear all the hopes and sacrifices of the people around him. He couldn't believe that he was so needed by everyone, but suddenly he realized that people needed not just Matteo, but the crown prince, so he didn't think about himself, but about his duties as a prince. He could not restrain himself from these thoughts and wept, apologizing to the lady for his tears. The girl refused so that he would not be ashamed of his feelings. She admitted that she used to cry a lot too, but not because of the sadness of losing her father, but because of what was to happen next. When the prince was already deep in self-recriminations about the crown, the lady's words really made him feel better. Matteo said he would try to fix the situation. The girl closed the book and told him that she was glad to hear these words. Looking at the smile of the lady, the prince did not understand what he wanted now and just started to lean towards Lillian when Damien's voice caught the attention of both. The crown prince only looked at his uncle for a moment, but meeting the ominous look, he began to shun himself, regarding his wrong thoughts towards the lady. Matteo quickly jumped up, saying that he had to go. The girl was worried and told the groom to check if everything was okay with the boy. The lady also asked how the prince found them, and in response to her question, he asked if he had interrupted the conversation at the most interesting moment. The girl refused, that there was nothing of the sort. She added that it was Damien who turned out to be an uninvited guest, because she was only consulting the emperor. The prince changed the subject and said that the Lord of Turin had apologized to him, probably at his sister's request, but the lady assured him that she knew nothing of it. And yet the prince was sure that the lady had a hand in it. But Lillian assured him that although his brother loved her very much, he would not do something like that just at her request. When talking to the head, he made it clear that he was not happy to leave his sister in the hands of the prince. Damien insisted that not even a hair fell from Lillian's head, and the smile did not leave her face. Therefore, her words that her brother would not rush to immediately fulfill her whims seemed completely false to him, and although it was only a political marriage, he believed that even in such a union, one should show care for the partner. Looking at the girl, the prince thought that now his attitude had completely changed because he needed her. However, he suddenly thought that if the lady found out about his intentions, he would no longer be able to feel free as before. But he did not understand what the reason was. Maybe because of the ancient weapon, or maybe his unexpected appearance surprised her. Only he thinks about it, then his patience bursts. The prince stared at the lady for too long, and Lillian asked if everything was okay. The most important thing for him right now was that he could be around, but now was not the time to tell everything, so he smiled and said that everything was fine. Books suddenly started falling from the shelves. The prince noticed this, and at the last moment managed to cover the girl with himself, being too close to her. Damien was ready to assure that he had no extra thoughts about the situation. He just wanted to touch the lady's hand as if to protect it from the books. He himself was not sure that he would be able to bear anything more now, but only the thoughts that he wanted to touch her were spinning in his head. The prince seemed to be ready to take this step, but abruptly stopped himself so that the girl would not suspect anything, and, stepping back slightly, apologized that because of him the situation had acquired an indecent character. Lillian assured that it was her fault for what had happened. The prince looked at the good poor woman with a smile. He wondered if she would be scared when she found out the truth about him. Maybe he would start to sympathize with him, but he cut himself off from these thoughts because he understood that he did not want this curiosity to dissipate. The Lady of Turin was never to find out that her husband was a monster. The prince quickly got up and said that he should have gone before saying goodbye to the lady. The girl wondered why she always felt goosebumps from his simple words. It seemed to her that something was not right, but she didn't want to think about it now, because she was finally left alone. Of course, the lady would not like to hide now and make everyone worry, but there was no other choice yet, and she exhaled heavily. A couple of days ago, she came to her brother with a request to look at the report book, because it was the most important thing in the management of the household. The girl assured her that she was now the only woman in the family, and it was her duty, so she couldn't put this on her brother's shoulders as well. Of course he liked that his sister was taking care of him, but working with reports that were larger than any manuscripts was difficult. His conscience did not allow him to make his sister suffer, so he said that after the wedding, she would be forced to deal with it anyway, so there was no need to rush. The lady said that she wanted to learn it before the wedding, so that it would be easier later, but the brother replied that then you cannot get married at all. At this, the brother firmly stated that he was not going to give her the report book, even despite her endurance. The girl was saddened to hear this, but the head only thought that what was the point of her endurance, because her spirit lived in a body that seemed to be made of the thinnest glass. At that, Cedric interrupted that the conversation was over, saying that his sister should take better care of her health. Of course, Lillian did not forget her brother's ban at her request, but there was no double bookkeeping in this world, and it was inefficient to do things that way. She understood why the head was so worried about her, but here he was the only native person, so she wanted to make his job easier. A few days passed, and Cedric found himself piled with various documents on his desk. It seemed to him that he made his sister understand clearly, but the girl apologized and said that she had secretly sorted all the documents. The lady was ready to accept any punishment for disobeying the order, but the brother only looked at her skeptically. He was even a little surprised that his sister wanted to be punished for helping him. The lady confirmed, though she really thought it was going as she wanted it to. Let her not be able to do anything about the rumors that Cedric carelessly spread at the expense of the fact that he was ready to give his place to Lillian's child in the future. But the problem was that some rumors were impossible to listen to, so she wanted to show everyone that her brother could be strict even with her own sister. She was already ready to accept the punishment, but the head stood up sharply and said that he would not allow this to happen. The boy could not believe that his sister wanted to allow him to use her to maintain discipline, so from that moment he forbade discussing the rationality of her action. The girl assured that from the very beginning she did not want any overly severe punishment, but her brother once again emphasized her past decision. In the end, the head decided that if the sister wanted to be punished, he said that at the great negotiations she should spend everything, down to the last penny. The lady was surprised, because it didn't look like a punishment. He assured her that it was punishment enough for her. The girl still wanted to say something, but the head only said that he was offended that his sister devalued one of the richest people. Instead, he praised his sister for a job well done, and the lady took advantage of this to try to talk him out of her punishment. But the brother was adamant. Cedric looked at his sister and laughed lightly, but Lillian knew that then he made two mistakes. First, he allowed her to calmly proceed to the next step. Secondly, if he had known in advance, he would have begged her to spend all this money to the last penny. Lady wanted to spend this money thoughtfully and economically with a definite plan. The next day, the girl was already holding a document in her hands, which mentioned the increase in her budget, and she began to pretend that she did not know what to do with this money. Rita emphasized to the lady that she was given this money so that she could spend it as she wished. The girl smiled, hinting that this money belonged to Turin. Looking at the lady, the maid immediately recognized her intentions, because she was sure that the lady already knew how to spend this money. Lillian laughed at this, and therefore moved closer to the maid to whisper her plans to her. The maid took a couple of steps away from what she heard, and said that if the head found out about it, he would probably beg for the money. In his chambers, the prince sat on the windowsill looking at the setting sun, which illuminated the room. In fact, Damien Rufenbein lived, enjoying the fact that he was something of a wild beast. It was not for nothing that they said that if you can't overcome it, then love it. Although he had not chosen such a life, it could not be said that the prince did not enjoy it. If you want something, get it. Only reluctance justified inaction. Once his elder brother told him that, despite his strength, he should not give up everything human, because he also had something human. Like everyone else, he can grow old and die. But Damien only laughed at it then, saying that if someone like him died of old age, it would be the greatest tragedy. The prince sighed sadly. It has been 7 years since his brother's death, but if he were still alive, he would probably tell everyone that this is not possible, would pester him, and I would probably ask everyone what kind of girl Damien is. In the end, the prince admitted, looking at the sky, that he had found the one with whom he would like to be close. Matteo entered the room, looking lightly inside. The prince paid attention to his nephew, but remembering what he had seen in the library, he immediately said that he had no great desire to talk to him. The crown prince was ready for such an answer, but he came on business, because a letter had arrived for his uncle. The young man came up and put the letter on his uncle's lap, but the prince just looked at him in silence, not wanting to open the envelope. Suddenly, the uncle asked his nephew where his manners, for which he was so praised, had gone. This somewhat alarmed the crown prince. Matteo thought that the prince was alluding to the situation that happened in the library. The young man wanted to say something, but his uncle cut him off. He gave his nephew a cold look and said that it was time and honor to know. These words shocked the crown prince. He could not say a word. The younger prince did not answer anything and just left the room. When Damien was left alone, he closed his eyes in shame, because he understood that he had treated his nephew like a child. He remembered the letter again and opened the envelope and began to read. The sender asked the prince if he was all right. The letter also warned the prince not to give a hint to the head of Turin to doubt himself. Otherwise, Cedric will definitely request a change of partner to Matteo. This message enraged the prince. Damien could not believe that such a thing could really happen, and instead of him, a nephew could be recorded in the documents. After reading the letter, the prince finally understood how he felt, who was consumed by jealousy. However, the prince quickly forced himself to calm down, because he understood that if someone noticed him not as he wanted to appear, then there could be problems. In addition, in this case, Cedric will definitely change his sister's fiancé in the documents and write Matteo there. There was a knock on the room, and the prince immediately broke away from the letter. A servant came in and told the prince that Lady Lillian wanted to see him. The prince was surprised, but also understood that it was untimely. Now he could barely contain his energy, the guy wanted to say. That now was not the best moment, but the servant immediately informed that the doctor had also persistently asked for the prince to come. At this, His Majesty immediately forgot about his problems and ordered that he be immediately taken to the lady. The girl met the prince again lying on the bed. She wanted to get up, but the prince told her not to. The lady immediately apologized that she was again forced to add to the prince's troubles. But without his help, it was difficult for her to maintain her existence. The prince only smiled at this and said that after they exchanged marriage documents, he belonged to her completely. However, he suddenly realized that he does not even remember where his document went, so on his return, he will have to tell Ivan to look for it. The lady smiled gratefully at his words. Lillian said she still wanted to make one request to him today. The prince was stunned for a moment, but answered that he was ready to listen. The girl tried to make a request, but the prince was worried that she would ask for a divorce. But she didn't say any of that, but on the contrary, she asked him how he felt about speeding up their wedding. The prince did not expect this at all, so he looked at the lady in surprise. Lillian wanted to explain, but noticing Damien's reaction, she fell silent. There were only questions in my head. He could not understand what the lady was talking about. It seemed to him that everything was a dream. The girl did not dare to continue the conversation without expecting that the prince would be stunned by such a shock. She herself did not expect that their relationship was better now than in the original. Finally, the lady decided to explain her haste. Lady wanted to show, before the great negotiations, that their blood marriage was much stronger than everyone thought, because many in the imperial palace were definitely not happy about their rapprochement. Looking at the girl, the prince realized that all this was not a dream after all, so he calmed down a little. However, the prince said that it takes time to prepare for the wedding. In addition, the consent of the emperor must be obtained, and this can only be done in the palace. Each of the noble families of the ruling empire had periods when the imperial family did not cause them good feelings and special respect. Therefore, the ruling dynasty introduced one unofficial tradition for the aristocracy. The most favorite resting places of the nobility were Kontakun and the imperial palace, two places where you can get any permit. The tradition quickly spread among noble families eager to demonstrate their military power, and now it has become an almost obligatory ceremony. The lady answered this, that the emperor would use any means to hinder them both. Lillian thought that the emperor was sure that they would hold the wedding in the imperial palace, so he must have prepared a plan to use it for their evil. However, due to the fact that her brother increased the budget for her, this money was enough to do the wedding ceremony on her own. The lady still finished the prince with the news that her plan was unusual, because every feudal lord still had the right to allow this marriage. The prince understood that she was right. The prince thought for a moment and said that every girl had certain hopes for how their wedding would go. Looking at the lady, he asked if it was true. Lillian fell silent, not knowing what to say. She only knew that marriage alliances in the empire were the most valuable reason for pride. Everything played an important role in it, from how the hall was decorated, how they were dressed, and what rings they chose. Talk of it followed a person until death, but it also meant that there were times when the wedding ceremony became a lifelong shame. Therefore, the prince asked if the lady had any special wishes about this, even though it was a strategic marriage. However, as Damien said, Lillian had wishes for a wedding, even though it was in her past life. Her character had already married a prince once, so she knew that she didn't need anything special. On the contrary, now the girl was more interested in life after the wedding. In addition, she was sure that, as in the novel, if she bored him a lot with the wedding, then he would start to consider her annoying, even though the prince was smiling now. And yet there was no idea in her plans to arrange a grandiose wedding. Clasping her hands, she replied that everything was fine. However, such an answer only disappointed the prince, and he realized that for the lady, it was really only a strategic alliance. Lillian noticed his disappointment, but didn't know what to say. Looking at him, she noticed that the prince looked so unhappy that she felt sympathy for him. The girl decided to comfort him, and added that this wedding was not only for a good cause, because her life was also in his hands. She continued and said that if he suddenly decided to leave her, the lady would die of her illness within a year, and she would like to live a long, long time. The lady was still confident that she will not be able to live happily every day, and she will definitely not feel the love that turned everything upside down inside. But this did not scare her at all. Lillian thought that the satisfaction of not wasting time, the satisfaction of having been able to stop a certain misfortune, would be enough. To wish for more would be greed. Holding his hand, the Duchess finally asked the prince if he would agree to marry her. The prince did not have enough strength to take his hand away, and he only silently looked into the lady's eyes. Finally, he smiled and squeezed his bride's hand even tighter. However, Damien, remembering his brother-in-law's past reaction, asked the girl if she was sure that this time her brother would bless their union. Milady could not object to this, but she already had a solution for such a case, so she asked Rita to bring the documents. It was the official seal of approval from Duke Hemenrin for their marriage. The girl said that the Duke had prepared this permission in advance in case her brother refused. However, she also remembered the Duke's words about Damien. The man said that if the prince somehow did not like the lady, then she could tear up the engagement documents at any moment. To this, Lillian only asked if the Duke could say such a thing, but the older man replied that he had a special right to do so because he had to leave this world so soon. Without hiding anything, Hemenrin said that he did not care what happened to the world after his death, but he was glad that he was able to meet the lady at least for the end. The girl looked at the document signed by the Duke, remembering how he always wished her only happiness. Looking at her smile, the prince also smiled and said that in this case, he also has to provide something as a certificate. The lady was surprised, because at the conclusion of the marriage, in order to achieve mutual trust, this was necessary, but they were already almost spouses. The prince smiled again. He saw that the bride had no expectations of him at all, but this did not bother him because she had already become his wife. He understood that they would live without suspecting that she was in the hands of a monster. Damien wanted to warn her to be careful feeding the wild beast, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. Lillian apologized for not having prepared anything for this moment. The prince also apologized because in such cases he should have given her a ring from his mother, but he didn't have anything like that. The boy wanted to say that he was deprived of this because he was considered a monster, but quickly changed his words to the fact that he was the third son. The girl was somewhat surprised by such words because she thought that anything would suit her. Therefore, the prince quickly asked if he could kiss her. The lady did not understand at first, so she immediately agreed, and in a moment she looked at him with great surprise. Damien once again asked her permission, noticing that the lady seemed to be against it. The lady replied that it was not that she was simple, it was just unusual, but the prince said that they were already almost married. Besides, even the doctor said that transferring magic through physical contact was also possible, and holding hands wasn't too effective, so they could find a more convenient way. Lillian continued to look at him in surprise, and turned away in a moment, because the prince was too close, and she could not show her emotions. The guy came even closer to her, saying that what he wanted to give her was his first kiss. He again asked her permission to do this, and this time the lady agreed. Without wasting another second, Damien tenderly kissed the bride. After the kiss, the girl began to feel the energy flowing through her body without any hindrance, as it usually did, although it was still unusual. The prince began to retreat from her bed, and the lady looked at him, but was very surprised to see that he was crying, but did not understand why. The next day, an engineer came to Cedric and showed him the design of a new carriage for his sister. They also came to offer him a dress for a lady and an imperial diamond found in the mines of Turin. The head noticed that all these things looked quite expensive, so he immediately announced that he was ready to buy them all. The sellers were pleased with the generosity of the chapter, but Alan noticed that it might be too much for the lady, and she might feel some discomfort. Cedric was sure that his sister would somehow react like that, but he believed that even these things might not be enough for her. The violent death of the emperor, the death of the head of their family, the chaos and threat of war that loomed over them. That's what he was worried about. Satisfied with these events, the boy believed that he had no chance to become better than his father, but he understood that Turin now needed not an immature heir, but a real head. That's why he decided to follow in his father's footsteps, did everything to get even a little closer to him. However, he failed, and eventually failed. I could feel the abyss in which he found himself. It seemed that no one would reach out to help him from anywhere, but it so happened that little Lillian pulled him out of her. He was sure that the girl herself did not understand how much she helped him. The head did not want to give his precious sister to anyone. He wanted to do everything to make her happy. While he was thinking, his sister came into the office and told him that she was going to get married right now. From the unexpectedness of such news, the head accidentally turned over all the documents on the table. The brother still could not form a bunch of words, but finally asked why the sister was in such a hurry. The lady replied that the ceremony would take place in any case. She just wanted to speed up the process. The brother muttered that the emperor's permission still needed to be obtained, but Lillian refused. That she did not need him, and began to insist, because this marriage was necessary not only for her, but also for all of Turin. However, the head was not in favor and was not ready to grant her permission yet, and tore up the document she held out. The lady replied that it was only a copy. Taking his hand, she hoped that he would make the right decision, worthy of the head of the family. And this decision was extremely difficult for him, but in the end, the document was signed. 7 days before their wedding, Lillian invited the prince to a tea party to discuss everything. She told the prince that she didn't want to have an extravagant wedding. The prince assured that the bride was ready to do it as she wished. The girl was very happy, feeling relief. The prince also handed her the marriage contract and told her to read it and add something if necessary. The contract repeatedly referred to her funds and real estate, which the prince transferred to her after the marriage, as well as permanent funding. It also talked about fines if one of the spouses cheats. The girl was quite surprised by these points. Damien inquired about which point the bride was talking about, but the girl replied that she meant all the points. The girl began to explain and said that the number of gold bars was too much, because 3 bars were enough to feed a family of 4 people for a whole month. In addition, the full right to taxes from the richest city was also too much. But the most important thing is that after her betrayal, the groom was not supposed to break the marriage, but for 10 years forbade her to do it. This contract seemed unfair to her, and the prince offered to reduce the term from 10 to 7 years. Seeing her reaction, the prince tried to shorten the term even more, but the girl did not mean that at all. Damien said that he could not go for less. Finally, the girl said, which meant that all these conditions were too good for her. The prince was quite surprised by this. The lady could not say it out loud, but it seemed to her that this contract was somehow one-sided because the prince was paying a high price, and her conscience did not allow her to agree to it. His Majesty only smiled at this. At first, Lillian seemed unhappy to him, but in the end, he saw that she was actually sweet. He would never have thought that there was anyone else as simple-minded as her, because this marriage, on the contrary, put her in a disadvantageous position. However, he could not tell her about it, and the only thing he could give her was material values. Usually, people were bound by beauty, but the lady was too noble for that. At this, he told the lady to agree, because whoever was to become his wife deserved all this. The girl still tried to say that these expenses were unnecessary, but the prince did not think so, because money did not matter to him. In addition, the prince emphasized that there is a week left before the wedding, so it will be impossible to make a new contract. He also said that they had not done anything today. The girl was surprised, not understanding what exactly, but noticed how Isaac suddenly left the room. The prince sat down next to the lady, and before she had time to say a word about the contract, Daman bent down and kissed her, taking the documents. He liked such moments very much, but he did not want them to stop, and laying his head on the girl's chest, said that he was a little tired. Giving in to the moment, she put her hand on his head, but took it away in a moment, apologizing for the extra movement. The prince said that she could continue if she didn't mind. The lady sensed a hint of disappointment in his voice, so she decided not to interrupt the process. Continuing to lie like that, the girl eventually gave up, and therefore agreed not to change anything in the contract. She also suddenly realized that she did not want this moment to end. The housekeeper was somewhat angry and said that a week was too little for preparation, because even ordinary people spend more time on this. Lillian said that now was not the time to have a grand wedding, and Lady Havis just let out a reproachful breath. However, there was nothing to do, so she told Milady to rely on her. Immediately after this, the housekeeper went to the rest of the servants and said that the date of the lady's wedding had already been set. She said that starting today, the honor of the servants of Islar is at stake, so they must do everything to organize the perfect wedding. The servants thought that the wedding would take place in the imperial palace, but they were even more pleased with this, so they got to work without any hesitation. However, some of the maids were still upset, because they understood that after the wedding, the lady would probably no longer live in Turin, so they would miss her. Altogether, they began to remember the pleasant moments of their work and how Milady took care of them. Lillian allocated a generous budget for a recreation room for the servants and also ordered various books for them. They were also remembered for the vacations that the lady gave, so it became somewhat shameful that they did not believe in the kindness of the lady at first and behaved badly with her. At this point, they wanted to get to work even more determinedly to repay their lady's kindness in this way. The cook asked when exactly the wedding would take place. Lady Havis replied that in a week, to which the servants were quite shocked. The cook even got a little angry because of such a short deadline and asked who came up with such a thing. But when she heard that it was the desire of the lady herself, she thought that they wanted to check them in this way. From that day on, the servants worked tirelessly. There was something mesmerizing about the fact that busy people were running here and there in the palace. However, for an unknown reason, they showed hostility towards Daman and his companions. Of course, the princes and Isaac noticed such hostility from the servants, but Matteo also noticed that his uncle was not bothered by anything. However, no matter what, everything went according to the prince's plan. The servants were busy preparing everything for the wedding and scrubbing the floor as if they were about to rub it to the holes. And the main person responsible for the whole action, Lady Havis, paid a lot of attention to my lady's outfit. But even so, Lillian did not share her efforts, wanting to wear something from what she had. The girl said that it would be impossible to sew a new dress in a week, but the woman was only upset that the lady would not wear a new outfit for her own wedding. Sewing a new dress would take at least 3 weeks. If the past Lillian were in her place, she would probably be upset that she would not be able to wear a new dress. However, for the current, her lush dresses have become everyday. So the lady refused. That her brother had prepared well for her trip to Confronting, so she had dresses she hadn't worn yet. In addition, she assured that if she did not dress elegantly, she would not even stand next to the groom. The woman understood that the lady's words were somewhat true, but she did not want to think that their lady was not beautiful. Perhaps she was not so beautiful to fall in love at first sight, but she was very kind. At this, the housekeeper assured that the lady would look no worse than the groom. Of course, no one expected that the prince would be so handsome, but Lillian was no worse. Havis noticed the attentive look of the lady and asked about it, to which the girl replied that from the words of the housekeeper, it seemed to her that she loved her very much. With such preparation, a week passed quickly, but during these days, for some reason, a lot of rain and terrible weather began. The head, in turn, began to ask whether everything was ready before the start of the ceremony. He was told that everyone was already waiting. The guests were already there. Cedric also looked out the window and noticed that the weather was not smiling on them at all, but he hoped that nothing bad should happen on such a day. Everyone was surprised that the weather had deteriorated so sharply, and Matteo assumed that this was a punishment for his uncle, because he planned something bad that deserved punishment. Isaac told the crown prince not to say such things about his uncle. When Damien abruptly turned to them, the knight was not surprised by such a reaction of the prince, because everything was really going against the grain. The knight wanted to say that in such a situation it would be better to hold the ceremony in the church, but the weather again made it clear that this idea was also useless. While everyone was silently waiting, knights entered each of the rooms and reported that trouble had happened. The building of the church itself and the wedding hall, where the bride herself was preparing for the ceremony, were destroyed. Cedric immediately ran to the scene of the tragedy. The boy still couldn't believe that this could happen. The altar was completely destroyed, and it was impossible to restore it. Also, one of those present told the servant that it was necessary to check whether everyone was safe and evacuated safely. The guests were no less worried about what happened and started talking about canceling the ceremony. Cedric was passing by and heard one of the guests talking in a whisper, saying that it was a sign not to hold a wedding because it could bring trouble. The guy couldn't help but be angry, because if the ceremony is really canceled because of this, then his sister's honor will be significantly damaged, and she hasn't even made her debut yet. It was also no less angry that Duke Blanchet sent a letter and a gift of medicine that was taken during pregnancy, making it clear that this wedding was a disgrace arranged in a hurry until the belly was visible. Lady Lannister had long suspected that the Duke would do something like this, so she said that the girl needed to get married safely as soon as possible, otherwise she would never wash away the shame. Cedric pulled himself together and first wanted to inspect the church to assess the consequences of the destruction, but he didn't have time to do anything when Lillian entered the hall. Everyone was surprised by the image of the bride. Although there were no clear rules in the Empire about what a daughter-in-law should look like, a veil was seen on a bride for the first time. The girl approached her brother and asked what had happened, because she noticed the restlessness of the guests. The guests thought that the lady would definitely cry if she heard what had happened. When her brother told her what had happened, the girl first moved away from him. It seemed to strike her hard, but in a moment she laughed. It seemed to her an incredible joke of fate, but she did not even seem to pay attention to it, as if she did not care. One of the guests also laughed and was told to apologize to the lady for it, but the man did not understand why, because the bride herself said with such sarcasm that her wedding was ruined. The rest of the guests were also affected by this atmosphere and even started joking about this comical situation. Cedric was quite surprised that just a moment ago, everyone considered this situation a tragedy and a disgrace, but thanks to Lillian, they began to see everything as a joke. In the end, the head also decided to join in with a laugh to support the joyful atmosphere that the sister was trying to create. While everyone was laughing and joking, someone from the hall drew the attention of the others that the rain had stopped outside and the weather had started to clear up. The brother turned to his sister and asked what she planned to do now. The girl thought for a moment. She looked up at the balcony and saw her fiancé. In a moment, the lady said she had an idea. They decided to move the whole celebration to the street, because the sun was already shining brightly outside. All the guests were placed at the tables, and one lady looked up with surprise, that the cups were not filled with heated alcohol, but tea. I also couldn't help but emphasize that the service itself was also quite beautiful, although unusual at first glance. Others began to praise the drink itself, and a friend said that if you add milk to it, the taste becomes even more delicate. The maid looked after the guests and noticed that everyone was having a good time, that they had already forgotten about the past trouble. Although at first it seemed that everything could go wrong, the place on the street was quickly put in order, and the maids were happy for a good job. The guests did not stop saying with satisfaction that they liked the ceremony in the fresh air. The atmosphere was very pleasant, and there was no need for alcohol. The ladies also could not pay attention to the fact that not long ago it was raining heavily here, but now the sky was clear, and the weather was warm, because they still walked in fur coats in the capital. One lady said that such a period in Turin was called the breath of spring, and the other picked up that it was very romantic that newlyweds got married at such a moment. A strong but warm breeze was blowing, and the girls were playing with each other while their hats were blown off. Matteo also couldn't help but notice that after the weather became clearer, everything started to go well. Music began to play, and the melody spread between the tables. Cedric led his sister to the altar as the music played. The boy regretted that he did not have time to do much more for his sister and did not expect that she would leave him so quickly. The brother praised the sister for showing such resilience and courage in a difficult situation. The lady replied that she had not done anything like that, thinking that she was just lucky. She didn't even joke about it, because she thought she was really lucky. Looking at the beauty of her fiancé, she began to consider herself the duchess of some magical fairy tale. She could never have thought that she would have such a beautiful wedding. Suddenly, she realized that she was very worried, so she forced herself to pull herself together. Cedric noticed that his sister was nervous and asked her if everything was okay. The girl smiled reassuringly to her brother. In the end, she put her palm into the outstretched hand of the prince and let go of her brother's hand. Daman happily said that he could eventually marry her. He had been waiting for this moment for so long. Also, the prince could not help but notice the beautiful flowers that were embroidered on her veil. But even so, he emphasized that she was the most beautiful flower. The girl suddenly thought that she had not made a mistake in choosing the veil, but despite this, she still thought that she would not be able to surpass the prince's beauty. Finally, a priest approached them and the ceremony officially began. Everyone was silent while the father pronounced the vows. When the father asked the couple if they agreed that he should become a witness of their marriage, the bride and groom answered in the affirmative in one voice. After their agreement, the father held out a document on which the bride and groom had to put their signatures. While the prince was signing, the girl thought that it was not easy to get her brother's consent to issue the marriage certificate, but she was glad that he agreed. When Daman finished, he immediately handed the pen to the bride. The girl took hold of the pen. However, she was delayed for a moment, because the signature had to include all official titles, and she was no longer Lilian Maristar from Turin, so she did not know how to sign. The prince noticed the confusion of the bride, so he began to whisper to her that she should start with the Empress of Leningrad first. She then began to write down Archduchess Rufenbein, Lady Hemenrin, and also Lady of Turin. And at the end of the Empress of Leningrad, Lilian Maristard, Islar Rufenbein. When she finished, the father announced that this document now certified that they had become husband and wife. The priest said that now they had to seal it with a kiss. The prince began to remove the lady's veil, saying that now she will not be able to give back. The girl did not understand what the prince meant by this, but she did not have time to ask because Daman kissed her. After the final kiss, the prince pressed his lips to her forehead, rejoicing that they were now married. He believed that from this moment she would not move anywhere from him. After a ceremony that seemed too long, the wedding was finally over. After the ceremony, all the guests continued to celebrate in the banquet hall and discuss the wedding. Solaria Lannister, Lillian's old friend, was also not indifferent. She was somewhat envious that the lady had married first. Rumors that the Archduchess had married after pregnancy did not subside, and this infuriated the lady, but her interlocutor calmed her down by saying that now it is rare for anyone to immediately go to the bride's room after marriage. However, wedding traditions often changed. The aristocracy is connected with the concept of empire, but there was no smell of agreement and friendliness in these circles. In this case, the wedding is something like an alliance. It is not easy to break such a union, so the relationship between lovers was much easier than between husband and wife. Talks that the lady could spend the night with her lover did not subside, and the prince heard these conversations. Walking down the corridor, he was sad, realizing that he still had a long way to go to fully get his wife. However, if he could still cope with the anxiety, he could not get out of his head that if Matteo became emperor, Lilian would want to break off her marriage with the prince in order to marry his nephew. He desperately opened the door to the room, realizing that he would have to get used to empty rooms, but he did not expect to see his wife waiting for him. Daman was completely confused, so he asked what the lady was doing here. The girl frowned, not knowing what to say. Finally, she said that she was now his wife. Placing her hand on the bed, the lady assured that she would not demand anything serious from him. The girl said that she was forced to restrain herself because of her illness, because she was not one of those who ignores the doctor's recommendations. The lady wanted to explain why she had come, but the prince already understood. That his wife visited him through guests so that they would think that their marriage was real. Now everything became clear to him. He exhaled and said that each of the guests should be given a gold ingot when it dawns. The prince sat down next to his wife. He came to this room to dispel the doubts of the aristocrats, but he did not expect that he would get something more. Lillian said that if the prince was uncomfortable, then she could lie down separately. It was even very warm by the fireplace. The prince smiled as he asked the lady, "What will happen if someone sees him carrying another set of underwear out of the room?" The lady thought, realizing that she hadn't thought of that, but luckily the bed was quite big, and the two laughed about it. It was dawn, but the lady had already opened her eyes. The prince leaned close to her, telling her to sleep because it was quite early. The girl frowned a little, wondering how long they had been sleeping in each other's arms. Damien got up and said that the sun was still far from the zenith, but since it had already cleared, he wanted to open the curtains. The lady also stood up a little. The prince asked his wife if she was not cold and said that he would be back soon, so let him wrap himself tightly in a blanket for now. While she was waiting, she did not notice how she fell asleep. The prince returned to bed, saying to his sleeping wife that he had been waiting for this moment. Although he was afraid that this marriage could end badly for Lillian, he promised that he would give her a peaceful life. 3 days have passed since the wedding day, and the ladies were discussing the latest events. It was said that the bride and groom spent the night together. When the conversation began that the bride and groom were too clearly trying to play the role, one of the interlocutors interrupted the lady with a cough. Everyone immediately paid attention to her, and the lady assured that she just didn't feel well today. In fact, it was difficult for her to watch how the girl's honor was being soiled literally before her eyes. In the end, the lady's friend advised her to rest, and both left the room. The rest of the girls started talking about which families they were from. The other replied that they were part of the Empress's society. They were remembered because they stood in the first rows at the ceremony. Also among them was probably Lady Sophia, who received an offer of a hand and a heart. At the meeting, the presenter thanked all the participants of Lily of May, because thanks to them, they were able to protect her friend's honor. Solaria agreed, but she couldn't help but notice that everyone was talking a lot of different bad things. Lillian entered the room, and Lannister, as if immediately forgetting everything, threw herself into her arms. Ilaria, in turn, began to calm her sister, because she almost knocked the Archduchess off her feet. Milady assured her younger sister that everything was fine, but said that it was better for her to call her sis when they were alone. The girls began to admit that they did not expect that their friend would get married before the debut, and not just for someone, but for the prince himself. However, they assured that the wedding turned out to be very luxurious, and the next lady will have to try to surpass the Archduchess. Lillian said that all this was with the support of friends, so she prepared gifts for them, but it was difficult to choose something special. But all the ladies were happy about that too, because everyone was given a drink called Tears of the Isler Rose. They said that the drink was extraordinary. Also, each received wonderful silks and tea, which everyone had already tasted before the wedding ceremony. The guests began to notice that the couple spent a lot of money to give everyone such a gift. Also in each box was a letter from Lady Lillian thanking everyone for coming. People began to say that probably more money was spent on gifts than others spent on a wedding ceremony in the imperial palace. Also, everyone had heard a lot about the women's community at the banquet, but they were sure that if the Empress had not been with them, they would not have shone so brightly. People kept saying that it was hard to lose a reputation when you were so generous. Some had heard that Lady Lillian used to enjoy the patronage of the late Grand Duke. Everyone couldn't wait to see what would happen to the Archduchess's alliance. When the guests finished their secret calculations, it was a moment that Cedric and all of Turin would have liked to avoid, but the prince had been waiting for it the most. The moment when the bride had to leave her parents' home. While seeing Lillian off, Lady Havis couldn't hold back her tears, because in addition to the lady, she was also saying goodbye to Rita, so the Archduchess understood her emotions. Milady thanked the housekeeper for everything and promised that she would not offend her maid. The rest of the servants did not restrain their enmity, because the prince separated the brother and sister who were the only support for each other. Cedric also came to see off his sister, but said that they would soon meet in the capital anyway, so he did not want a ceremonial farewell. In turn, the girl only thanked her brother, that she was able to be his sister, because thanks to him, she did not know any troubles or horrors. And yet she couldn't just leave without hugging her brother goodbye, saying that her brother would still miss her. The head could not help but recognize this and understood that his sister's heart would always belong to Turin, and said that this palace would always be her home. At the end, the head turned to the prince, and taking out his sword, told him to take an oath. Without delay, Damien crossed his swords in front of Lillian's face. This moment has finally come for the girl. All her life she tried not to repeat the mistakes of the past, and let this marriage be just an agreement. But she was sure that no matter what obstacles she encountered, she would cope with everything, because everything was just beginning. At the prince's place, the servants began to worry that the prince was so weak that he could not endure the traditional journey, where he was supposed to greet all the servants. The nanny, in turn, began to worry even more, because she did not know that after marriage, the prince would decide whether to transfer the duties to someone else or to do everything himself. The woman only hoped that the prince's wife would have a steel rod on his character. The other maid understood the older woman's feelings, because she had taken care of the prince for a long time. Damien Rufenbein is the prince's only shield when his title is at stake. On the battlefield, it is the shield, not the sword, that is put under the greatest pressure, taking all the blows. It was hard to believe that this particular person was so weak that he could not go around all the nights. The butler, in turn, tried to calm the maid so as not to rush to conclusions and say too much, because the prince was supposed to return tonight. The older woman supported the butler and said that there was no need to pretend that they had completely abandoned the maintenance of the palace. In addition, they will soon meet a new lady. The servants diligently began to prepare for the arrival of the prince, because he was about to arrive. Meanwhile, His Majesty's carriage was already speeding towards the palace. The coachman shouted for the gates to be opened immediately. As soon as the carriage stopped, the butler immediately ran to open the door. The prince jumped out of the carriage, holding his wife in his arms. Damien asked if the servants had prepared the bedroom. The butler answered in the affirmative, and the prince immediately ordered to take him there. As soon as he entered the palace, the servants turned their heads to meet, but they were told that the situation was critical, so there was no time for greetings. Everyone was interested in what had happened, but there was no time for questioning, and the servants only looked at the trail of the prince, who ran as hard as he could to the room, holding Lillian. Shaw also arrived with the lady and the prince, and asked the lady to have the other servants help unload the medicine from the carriage. The woman asked who was in front of her. The doctor introduced himself, which surprised the maid. She didn't expect it, that her doctor will also come with the lady. Servants were waiting at the door of the room. The maid was very worried about the situation. There haven't been any new ones for some time. The butler tried to calm her down and asked why the woman was so afraid. The maid was very worried that the new lady would be like the empress. Dvoretsky, in turn, became wary. They did not really want to talk about the empress in this palace. Moreover, it was forbidden to speak her name here. Matteo came up behind and immediately refuted the servants' thoughts, saying that they were wrong. The woman immediately approached the young prince. She immediately began to examine the young man, worried about the hearing, but the prince, on the contrary, assured that he had recovered. The butler, in turn, greeted the prince and offered to go to his room to rest from the road. The boy did not object. However, before leaving, the prince told the nanny not to worry that the new lady would look like the empress. The woman was afraid of her long tongue and began to apologize for her words. Matteo wasn't going to scold her for it. He only said that the young lady was more like the past emperor. The servants were very surprised, and the prince assured that they would see for themselves when they got to know her. Meanwhile, someone's warm voice woke Lillian from sleep, and she opened her eyes. Everything floated in front of my eyes, and the images were blurry. In the end, she got up a little, assuring that everything was fine with her, but she was just overtired. Suddenly, blood started dripping from the nose. The prince handed the lady a shawl, and she gratefully took it. The girl turned away, and still had to admit that she was very tired. The man joked about it, narrating the doctor's words that you shouldn't diagnose yourself. The girl noticed that the prince had not changed his clothes since yesterday. The lady asked how long she had slept, and whether the prince had been here all this time. The boy replied that she had slept all night, and it was now morning, so he had not been here very long. Lillian said that the prince should have gone to change and rest. The prince wanted to object, but the lady turned away and cut off that it was difficult for her to relax while he was here. Damien apologized for not thinking about it and left the room. Rita silently looked in the prince's footsteps and thought from his reaction that the lady's words really touched him. When the doctor came to her, the girl told everything. Shaw noted that the lady was already in poor health, so her body did not survive the overexertion. The doctor began to examine her and suddenly asked if nothing else bothered the lady. She replied that she had not noticed anything like that, but thought that she was getting worse. The doctor replied that he could not be sure of this yet. On the contrary, It seemed to him that the lady was on the mend, but he told her to rest for a couple more days. However, the lady, on the contrary, became more upset because she understood that she was living too long, and every year it was more and more difficult to maintain good health. The doctor left recommendations for treatment 2 weeks ahead. The girl thanked her and asked how Shaw himself was feeling. He assured that everything is fine with him. However, it was already time for him to return, because he accompanied the lady only on the way in case she became worse. The girl said goodbye to the doctor, wishing for a safe journey back. Shu smiled and told her not to be too happy, because he would visit her again soon. Putting herself in order, the Archduchess told Rita that it would be necessary to say hello to all the servants, because they must have been scared when they saw that the new lady had come to the palace unconscious. Lillian noticed that the new look suited the maid very well. The girl blushed, but thanked for the compliment. The prince entered the room, and the lady immediately rushed to her husband. Damien immediately reported that he had followed all the lady's orders about him. Therefore, he asked if she now had some time to devote to him. The girl said that as much as you want, and the prince offered to sit down, because the conversation would be long. As soon as they sat down, the prince immediately began to ask his wife about her well-being and how she spent the day. The lady replied that they had not been separated for so long, for the day had not yet passed, but assured her that all was well. She understood that they needed to maintain the appearance of a loving couple. Besides, now they were in the capital, and rumors could spread faster here. Ivan also came to the room, kneeling before the lady. He immediately announced that he had come to report on some matters that required the consent of the Archduchess. The girl did not have time to ask what issues he was talking about when they put a whole mountain of documents in front of her to sign. All this related to her property, which was transferred to her after signing the marriage agreement. The lady remembered that her brother had also given her a lot of money before leaving. She began to understand that at this rate, she would become extremely rich. Isaac continued and pointed out to the lady what had first priority. The girl noticed a two-headed eagle on the casket. This is the imperial coat of arms, but not of the current family. Damien was the first to reach for the casket, telling his wife that many were against this thing becoming his inheritance. He placed the casket in the lady's hands and opened it. Inside the majors, the badge is the prince's right to be called the Emperor of Leningrad. This title was given to members of the imperial dynasty who showed themselves on the military field. Most aristocrats were against such traditions, because those who already had considerable privileges were rewarded. The prince explained that this title gave him independence from the imperial family. In other words, the emperor had no right to execute the prince, even if he rebelled against him. However, this concerned not only him, but also his children and even grandchildren. They too will inherit this title from him and all the benefits. Of course, the nobles were not satisfied with this, because this privilege created a risk of rebellion by its very existence. However, the tradition was still not cancelled. The previous emperor ignored popular arguments because he wanted a title that allowed him to contradict even the emperor himself. And that was not all, because his wife also received this title. The lady was quite surprised. Therefore, from that moment on, Isaac himself raised his voice to explain everything. He said that after marrying the prince, she was given the status of empress, although usually ladies who were part of the imperial family were only given the status of imperial lady. However, since she became the wife of the Emperor of Leningrad, she became on the same level as the empress. At this, the lady discovered that her husband was also on an equal footing with the emperor. The knight confirmed, though he said, that Damien had limited powers. The prince added and said that thanks to this, Claude succeeded in ousting his brother from the throne, becoming the new emperor by displacing Matteo. Ivan continued and said that the difference between a true emperor and an empress was that they could not rule the state, but were somewhat like a crown prince. The lady understood that in this way her husband was the second person after the emperor. Although she was mentally preparing for their marriage, she did not expect that she would have such a responsibility. Damien turned to Lillian, telling her not to worry too much, because with this title, he would be able to protect her. This is the shield that the past emperor left behind for him. The lady began to suspect what this shield was needed for, and the prince confirmed that his brother had guessed his fate in advance. The second brother committed treason, thus ousting the eldest from the throne. And the third, the youngest, remained to protect the only true heir. Lillian realized that despite the fictitious marriage, the prince was very frank with her. She began to realize that her engagement began to look more like the real thing. At this, the lady wanted to stop the conversation and said, "That is already tired. She has already heard everything she needs." The prince looked intently at his wife and immediately dismissed the knight and the maid. They immediately left the room. Damien lightly touched her hand, asking if she felt sick again. The girl immediately took her hand away, exclaiming that everything was fine with her. The prince was somewhat frightened by such a reaction of his friends, but the lady apologized without explaining anything and said that she wanted to go and rest, leaving her husband alone. Lady scolded herself a little for being so excited, even though she was preparing for everything. The girl bowed her head, scolding herself for her behavior, but she did not understand what was happening to her. She only thought about reducing the number of mistakes, taking the novel as a basis, but she did not expect it at all, which will be so closely connected with the prince's life. A marriage made for the sake of a contract, a bedroom for brides in which they had to look believable. The lady thought that it would not be difficult for her to play her part, but everything turned out not to be so, and now she had to be more careful, because at one point her feelings became stronger than she expected. And what is more important, the lady could begin to misinterpret all the prince's emotions and everything that happened between them. She thought that if these emotions were like this now and would become stronger later, then if the prince suddenly wanted to divorce her, she would be very hurt. Therefore, the girl understood that as soon as she accepted Damien as her husband with all her heart, from that moment her end would begin to come. Remaining in the room, the prince also could not get rid of the thoughts that he had made a wrong move, which is why the lady was avoiding him. He thought about the fact that his wife began to suspect that the prince was not human, because there were indeed moments when he almost showed his true essence in front of the lady. The prince did not know whether it was a matter of her character or her complete lack of interest in him, but Lillian never asked about anything. Damien exhaled, realizing that the lady hadn't exposed him after all, because if she had, she would have already begged her brother to save her. The prince thought that it was worth approaching her more carefully. She was like a small fish that swam to the hand as soon as it was worth putting it in the water. However, sensing danger, the fish immediately ran away. The prince thought to himself that he had almost caught Lillian. At night, he visited her room. The girl just went into the room and, noticing the man, asked why he had come. The prince turned to her. The man said that he was worried that the lady was not feeling well again, so he decided to stay by her side. The lady answered somewhat hesitantly that she had recently undergone a medical examination. Continuing, she said that according to the doctor's recommendation, everything was fine with her now, and there was no need for energy, so today he could sleep peacefully. He could see that the lady was lying, but he couldn't insist, otherwise things would turn against him. The prince agreed with a smile. He calmly left the room, but stood behind the closed door for some time. It felt as if his heart had been ripped out and buried in hot sand. Past Emperor Idol was like the sun on a warm spring day, and although he did not do anything outstanding during his reign, it was a peaceful time for the empire. During his reign, the emperor managed to put an end to conflicts. The secret of such success was his younger brother, Prince Damien Rufenbein. His incredible strength was a support for the emperor, and in the shortest possible time made the prince a generalissimo. And while the emperor had such a person, no one dared to go against him. At the same time, the middle brother Claude did not stand out in any way, and was only in the shadow of the younger one and became the faithful dog of the emperor. That is why, when the Emperor Idoel died suddenly and Claude became the emperor, people could say neither bad nor good about him, and at the same moment began to doubt Damien. But the first emperor once said with a smile that it was difficult to avoid fighting between brothers. However, the ambitious second brother did not stop at the conquest of the throne alone, and as if that was not enough, he married the wife of the former emperor. He found himself under criticism from the people, but he quickly silenced them. Having arrested 3 electors, he even executed one, but this was not his last victim. Footsteps echoed along the almost deserted corridor. The guard ushered the woman into the room, announcing that Lady Rachel had arrived. The lady smiled and asked why His Majesty was here alone. Without turning to her, His Majesty calmly relayed the lady's statement that Damien would never marry. From his tone, she immediately understood that today the emperor did not need a mistress, but a personal strategist. Approaching, the lady bowed, confirming her words. She assured that everything should be like that, if we talk about the prince himself, but she could not foresee that the head of Turin would push such meanness. However, the lady immediately assured that there was no reason to worry, because this marriage was only a political strategy, not having a stable structure. However, the emperor did not like this answer, and began to shout that she was trying to protect herself with such an excuse. although she could not cope with even a simple task. Rachel began to assure that it was not her fault, and it was all their fault. The lady promised that this would not happen again. At this, the emperor asked what she would do in such a case, so that this would not happen again. The woman replied that when a political union breaks up, the parties can get together one day. But when a political marriage breaks up, the spouses become each other's enemies. She understood that nothing good should be expected from a marriage that was not sealed on the first wedding night, so she could easily destroy it. In the end, the emperor gave her a month to make it so that these two only wanted to kill each other. The lady assured that she could be relied upon. In the prince's place, Lillian lay on the bed and smoked a pipe. She was sad because she didn't do anything but stay inside the four walls. She could not continue like this because she did not even say hello to the servants. Matteo entered the room. As he got closer, he said he noticed a maid with a bloody towel. The prince told her that the lady needn't have pushed herself so hard. He meant her marriage. The lady just smiled and answered that the prince was right. At the sight of her smile, the prince's heart fluttered, but he understood that it was not supposed to be like that. She didn't want to think that he had come to her just to say this. Nevertheless, he will not be able to forgive himself if the lady is upset even for a moment. Lillian turned to the prince and asked why he had come. The boy, recovering from his thoughts, handed the letter to the lady. It was a letter from Lady Rachel, and after reading it, the girl understood that it should be taken as a warning. In the letter, the lady wrote that she would like to continue to maintain warm relations with her, as they were now connected by the imperial family. From the very beginning, as soon as she married the prince, she knew very well that she would not be able to avoid meeting Rachel. The girl thanked the prince for personally bringing her the letter. Matteo said that it was not worth the thanks and offered to tell the latest news from the higher world. The lady gladly agreed. The prince said that the emperor actually had two wives. One is the wife and actually the empress, and the other is Rachel Wood, who stood at the head of all the ladies of the upper world. The most significant of the rumors was that even before the death of Emperor Edoel, the empress was in a relationship with Claude. Many did not believe it, but in the higher world it was perceived as a fact that the uncle who killed the prince's father and the mother who betrayed the man with his own brother. Matteo continued and said that the real power in the empress had been taken away by Lady Wood. The girl noticed that the prince was very serious about the situation around his mother. No one in the empire would approve of a woman who married her husband's murderer. Therefore, the empress decided to withdraw from the upper world in order not to face opposition. As a result, Rachel appeared on the scene, who was gifted not only with beauty, but also with intelligence and cunning. She ruled all the ladies like a real empress, and with her subtle play made a great contribution to the strengthened power of Claude. Matteo said that he had already met her and warned the lady to be careful when meeting this woman, but Lillian just laughed at it. The girl drew attention to the fact that the prince seemed to consider her a part of the family. Looking at him, she drew a parallel with her brother, because the young man was similar to him. Finally, the lady spoke, that if the prince was so worried about her, she should get out of bed and not look so weak. The prince did not know what to say, but looking at his aunt, he was saddened that someone like her had to face a serious illness. Matteo asked if the lady would respond to the letter, and with her agreement, he said that he should choose his words more carefully, because what they did at the wedding might not work this time. The lady agreed, understanding in advance that Rachel could not be bribed with gifts, so she deliberately overdid it during the wedding. The prince did not immediately understand what she was talking about, and the girl explained that in the wedding hall, she tried to leave all the guests with a sense of light duty to her, and the gifts she gave them were generous enough that their conscience would not allow the guests to openly criticize her. It might not work for everyone, but it made it clear that she was rich. She also admitted that invitations to the wedding were sent even to those who obviously could not come, and the letters contained a message like a small warning. After listening to everything, the prince breathed a sigh of relief and told his aunt that he would not worry about her now. At this, the prince apologized for taking a lot of her time and left. Looking at him, the lady wondered if she seemed too cunning to the prince. Standing outside the door, the prince realized that he had mistakenly thought of the lady, that she was just a nice girl, but in fact all her actions were a well-thought-out strategy. Lillian really looked like his father. All this time, Rita waited outside the door and was joined by Shaw. The maid knocked on the lady's room and informed her that a doctor had come to see her. Although the doctor said that they would see each other soon, the lady did not expect that so soon. The lady offered him tea. The doctor thanked him, but said that he would drink something stronger, showing the dark circles under his eyes. Over tea, the doctor admitted that he had received permission to visit the Ishalel Gate. Permission could only be obtained from the head of the Islar clan. Shah said that there were many ancient books in the treasury, so he asked Cedric for permission to read them to find a cure for Lillian's illness, and the head immediately agreed. The doctor said that he had carefully read all the books, and the lady asked if he had found anything interesting. The man said that he had found something, but had not yet told the chief anything. According to the ancient writings, it was impossible to cure the lady's disease completely, and the transfer of Thera was only a temporary effect, delaying the inevitable. He continued and said that for more stability, a suitable donor could be found. But considering that the lady had no energy of her own at all, the Thera infusion would stop working at some point. Shah could not go on to say what would happen next, but the lady herself knew that after all, only death would await her. The man could not stop scolding himself because he worked for the Islar family as a doctor for 7 years, but as a result, he still turned out to be insufficiently competent. He apologized to the girl with all his might. The lady just shook her head and then said that the doctor tried so well. Her calmness confused Shah. He had the feeling that the lady knew in advance that she was going to die. Instead, the girl asked for a favor. She said that she wanted to tell her brother about everything, so let the doctor keep quiet for the time being, that he had found some clues. The doctor agreed, but told the lady not to keep this secret. The lady refused to be persuaded and said that she was now the Empress of Langrad, and moreover, a hostage to her position. Lillian said that most people would only be glad that her life was about to wither away, so she couldn't reveal the secret just yet. Shah understood what she meant, so he agreed. The doctor also brought something with him, and, taking out the books with the flasks from his bag, said that it would be better if they were with the lady for the time being. After thanking the girl, she asked if the doctor would now return to Turin. He confirmed, and said that the head was also due to return there soon. The lady wished a happy journey. Left alone, the lady sadly began to think about it. How everything turned around. She managed to change the future somewhat, and it seemed that everything was going well. However, the luck that stood out to her was not infinite. She understood that it could not continue like this, but she still felt some relief. When Rita returned to the rooms, the lady immediately ordered the maid to bring Sir Ivan to her. As soon as he heard that the Archduchess was waiting for him, the knight immediately rushed. He couldn't help but be glad that the lady was better. When he entered the room, he was already holding a whole bunch of documents in his hands. The lady apologized. That she was taking up the knight's time, so she said that she would immediately listen to him while he signed the documents. Isaac immediately submitted the documents related to the premises in Contakun and asked to pay special attention to some points. The assistant also drew attention to the fact that it may take up to 3 months to process the documents. The girl understood and signed the following document. After examining the documents, the lady noted that they were structured and clear, for which she mentally praised the knight. She also noticed that the prince's possessions were disposed of without limiting himself. The knight wondered how the lady knew about this, and Lillian replied that she had noticed it while reading the documents. Isaac scowled, but had to admit it was true. Because the prince did not really like to do these things, so the duties were transferred to him. The knight also said that in the beginning, it was still possible to cope with it, but when the prince received the inheritance, the documents became much more. The lady praised the assistant for his work. The boy was embarrassed by the praise and said that the lady was better at it, but suddenly the voice of the prince came from behind. The lady was no less surprised by the appearance of the prince, but could not react to it in any way. Her head started to hurt from the long process of filling out the documents. The man handed her her cradle. The prince did not know that his wife was so busy, and the lady asked when exactly he came. The girl still did not feel very comfortable next to him. He replied that a minute ago, returning to the knight, he asked whether he had disturbed them too much. Isaac didn't answer, but the Duchess assured him that he didn't. On the contrary, the lady said, "It's good that the prince visited." The man smiled in response. The assistant invited the manager of internal affairs of the palace and the senior maid to the office. The servants greeted the lady. The Archduchess immediately reciprocated and, apologizing for the suddenness, wanted to ask them for help. The servants were a little surprised. The lady replied that she should have been introduced to the affairs of the palace immediately upon her arrival, but by then it was too late. Continuing, she said that she got acquainted with internal expenses, as well as with the number of employees and their salaries. Therefore, she decided that it would not be bad to deal with the documents sorted by the knight in order to move on to the next ones. The servants still did not hide their surprise. Immediately after that, the prince said that he would take away the documents signed by her. The lady graciously thanked him, and the maid looked surprised, because usually it was the other way around. In a moment, the lady said that now it would be difficult to separate the management of internal and external affairs, because there were few workers. The maid agreed with her and said that if it was shared, the workers would collapse from exhaustion. Therefore, the lady asked to be introduced to the peculiarities of managing internal affairs. As long as she had the documents, it was possible to deal with accounting, and the division process could be postponed to the next quarter. It was also necessary to put the accounting books in order. She asked the workers if they were against all this, but without waiting for an answer, she immediately turned to her husband for his opinion. The prince agreed without fail, and the workers, in turn, were only happy that they would finally be able to put everything in order. This is where the lady decided to end today. After leaving the office, the servant could not stop being surprised that the new lady took everything so seriously immediately after her arrival. The maid thought that because of the lady's poor health, they would limit themselves to just greetings. But she quickly realized that she worried in vain because the new lady turned out to be very intelligent. After that, I all left the office. The prince remained, and the lady turned to him, assuming that he still had a lot to do, but the man assured that he had nothing else planned. The prince only wondered what the lady's purpose was for asking this, hoping she didn't want to kick him out. It seemed to him that all his pride had disappeared, because if she refused him, it would hurt him, but still he did not want to refuse his wife. He wondered if it was worth it to become cute again. Instead, his wife did not give him time to think, and asked the prince to talk to the employees about the budget for the next year. Daman was somewhat disappointed, realizing that they were only connected by documents. However, he understood that no one else would have managed to bind him with documents like his wife did, and this was the most effective way to be close to her. The prince turned to her and thanked her with a smile. The girl suddenly felt guilty for making him wait so long. She wanted to say something, but the prince did not let her finish and said that they were constantly distracted by business and other people. Slowly removing his wife's glasses, he said that they had forgotten something important. Leaning down, he kissed her, and the lady did not resist. Without breaking the kiss, the prince mentally rejoiced that for the first time he was happy to live in this palace, and that he had found such a beautiful person for the first time. Daman was sure that now nothing would take her away from him, but he did not know how wrong he was in these thoughts, because he did not suspect that Lillian would not soon. The conversations of the noble ladies about Lady Islar's wedding did not abate. Some were surprised that she got married before she made her debut. Instead, some of the ladies wanted to stop these discussions, reminding Marianne of her exclusion from the ball of silver flowers. To this, the lady assured that she did not understand what was being said, but mentally promised herself that soon the reputation of her rival would be destroyed. When she was expelled from the community, she considered it the worst day, but it only got worse when rumors started about it. Fortunately for her, her mother was able to include Marianne in the community of Lady Rachel's peony ball, which saved her from that hell. Nevertheless, her family's reputation did suffer after Duke Hemenrin's betrayal. She did not worry about all this then, but in those days she did not understand much. For a while, Marianne, as soon as she heard the name Lillian, immediately spread rumors about her. However, one day she received a personal invitation from Lady Rachel. Having found herself in the mansion of the emperor's favorite, the girl immediately understood where she was. Every decoration in the palace was perfectly chosen. Most of all, the girl could not take her eyes off the fan, dreaming of how it would be in her hands. The lady was distracted from her thoughts by noticing what her interlocutor was looking at. The younger lady immediately began to make excuses, and Rachel only laughed when she noticed that the girl was startled by her joke. Marianne noticed that there were wounds on the lady's body, as the rumors said, but she did not understand the reason for their appearance. The lady again drew attention to herself, and the girl mentally scolded herself for the imprudence of looking at the lady for so long. For a moment she forgot what the society ladies had warned her about, which was to never ask Rachel about her bruises and cuts on her body. Finally, the lady spoke and said that she had called the girl because she had heard how she had been talking a lot lately about the new member of the imperial family. Marianne was stunned. She didn't expect that this could lead to problems, because she thought that the emperor considered the prince a blindfold, but now she was ready that the lady would punish her for it. Noticing the angry look, the lady immediately began to apologize, but in a moment she began to laugh at her for her naivety. Nevertheless, Rachel did not scold her, but warned that even if she also liked it, but openly criticized the Archduchess is not possible. Otherwise, the girl's reputation may suffer. In turn, the young lady understood that it was advice and thanked her for it. After that, the lady began to ask Marianne about the times when she and Lillian were in the same society. After finishing, the girl began to thank the lady who accepted her into her society. Rachel interrupted the story and ordered the maid to give the younger lady a gift for a beautiful story. As a gift, she received a fan, which she liked so much. Leaning over, the lady asked if the girl understood her advice, and Marianne realized that if she told more about her rival, she would receive a reward. At the end of the reception, Rachel looked out the window after the girl. She was somewhat disappointed that she knew much less than expected. Betty asked the lady why she gave the girl a fan, to which the lady replied that Marianne's greed and hatred for the new empress could still play into her hand. Rachel began to say dreamily that even if the empress's marriage was only an alliance, she would hardly want to see a man with a mistress. She couldn't wait to see who would be able to destroy this marriage. The senior maid was rowing breakfast for the lady, but by chance one of the maids ran into her, almost overturning the tray. The woman was not angry with the girl, but only told her to be more careful. As the head maid moved on, humming a little, the rest of the girls began to whisper in surprise at Lady Marine's behavior, because before that, she would have been scolded for such a thing. The girls decided that it was because a new mistress appeared in the house, because before that, the woman was worried that the prince did not marry at all. Opening her eyes, Lillian did not immediately understand why her back felt so warm. Looking around for a moment, she noticed a sleeping man. She quickly guessed that the prince was already awake and repeated to him that there was no need to strain yourself to sneak into her bed every night. Damien replied that they were married, so anyone would say that was fine. The lady did not understand this, because aristocrats never woke up together in the same bed. In addition, he could not fall asleep alone. The lady inquired about this, and the prince replied that he had been on the battlefield since he was a child, so he was not used to sleeping alone. The man said that since he was still too young to become an officer, he slept with the newly elected in the barracks. The prince apologized for this, but thought he could sleep with her. The wife did not say anything, but she began to understand something. Lillian realized that the prince wanted to be touched not because of bad thoughts, but simply because he wanted company, and she thought that she could also get used to it. Damien promised he wouldn't do that if she didn't like it. The girl looked into his eyes and understood that she could not scold him, so she said that she would probably be able to come to terms with it. The prince was very happy about this and wanted to get his wife's final permission to sleep together, but the senior maid interrupted him. The lady remembered that she herself had ordered the maid to bring breakfast by 10. When Lady Marine came in and saw the prince, she was a bit dazed, and Damien told her to leave and come back after a certain time. After the maid left, the lady warned the prince that this might spread rumors as if they were really very close. The prince asked if she was really so worried about this, because they were newlyweds, to which the lady firmly answered, and this surprised the boy even more. The girl explained that if the couple spends a lot of time together, then people will expect the appearance of a child. The prince immediately imagined it. However, the lady immediately replied that people would definitely not doubt him, because he was strong, but she had weak health. He wanted to deny it, but in the end he agreed with his wife. But he hoped that at some point she would start to regret keeping her distance from him. A butler knocked on the rooms and announced that the Emperor Matteo had arrived, as well as messengers with gifts from Claude I for my lady. The prince immediately drew the parallel that the gifts were only for his wife, because there was silent hatred between him and his brother, and even more so. Their relationship became worse. At this, the lady informed the prince that she had to leave the room. The man wanted to stop her, but the lady replied that they should obey the emperor's orders. The prince did not want to let her go, believing that one omission would not be bad. At that, she just lightly took his hand, saying that she hoped that the strongest man in the world would be next to her. At last the prince gave up, unable to fight her words, saying that she was teasing him. The lady did not understand what the prince meant, and without explaining, he said that his wife knew how to recognize other people's feelings and play with them. Through the door, the manager raised his voice again, asking what to do. The prince said that they were going and would leave soon. After his answer, the prince expected praise, and the lady could not deny him this, because she saw how he expected it, but she knew that there was a limitation that should not be forgotten. They crossed paths with Matteo in the corridor. The crown prince asked his uncle where he was going in his pajamas. Damien shrugged his shoulders and said that he was going to meet with the emperor's envoy. The nephew could not understand that the uncle was going to the meeting in such a way. The young man finally realized that arguing with his uncle was a waste of time, so he asked why the messenger had come. The lady replied that they were to deliver the decree to His Majesty. Matteo suspected something, so he said he would go with them. In the room, the guarded messengers were furious that they were being forced to waste so much time. The man was already very angry when suddenly the door opened. The prince expected a greeting from the messenger, and the man immediately introduced himself as Count Torin Schmidt. The count immediately wanted to explain his words when the prince approached, that he did not want to offend the couple, although Damien heard how he and his wife were called rude. The youngest of the envoys broke into the conversation, announcing that the count was the emperor's envoy. The prince returned after casually greeting Duke Banchet's son. Lillian was quite surprised at the appearance of Marianne's brother, because after the situation in the Women's Society, the Blanchet family sided with Claude. Matteo angrily approached Ethan Schmidt, asking who let him into the palace. The messenger wanted to say something, but the prince did not want to listen to anything and left the room. The earl was aghast at the crown prince's insolence, but Damien didn't judge him, especially after the earl's comments about him and his wife. Nevertheless, the prince wanted to put an end to this as soon as possible and asked for the decree to be read to him. The earl began to read, addressing the lady in particular. By his decree, the emperor announced that he accepted Lillian as a member of the imperial family and also gave her the title of Empress of Leningrad. His Majesty also gave the lady a gift, a tiara called Zori Princess in honor of their marriage. The prince silently watched the small ceremony, wondering at this, because the star of the princess in the empire had the right to be worn by a lady who was higher in rank than the crown prince. Milady, in turn, politely thanked the emperor for his generosity by accepting gifts. The lady could not believe that Claude, who denied complicity in the murder of his brother, claiming that he inherited the throne as the late emperor wanted, gave her the title of empress. At that, the prince intervened, trying to finish the ceremony as soon as possible, because he barely restrained himself from hitting Ethan Schmidt. None of the messengers detained him. Finding himself finally alone, the prince wanted to continue where they left off. The date of the reception had already been announced, and everyone had gathered in advance in the capital, so she invited a house from the Women's Society. The lady explained that she wanted to somehow repay them for the favor. The prince took this lightly, but noted that the lady had been very busy lately. He was worried whether the lady would have the strength to receive all the guests without resting, because she not only worked hard, but also helped Matteo, because of which the man rarely saw her. She felt sorry, but could not look the prince in the eyes, and turned away and refused. That everything is fine. Damien noticed this movement, and began to worry that his wife had actually been trying to avoid him this whole time. He tried to grab her from the very beginning. Even her slightest smile made him happy. However, if he did not try, but Lillian tried to avoid him every time. The girl drew attention to herself by saying that the transmitted energy was enough, and other ladies should arrive soon. She wanted to get up, but the prince still did not want to let her go. He wanted her to sit with him a little longer and rest, because in the last few days he noticed from his wife, from her various movements and body temperature, that she was getting very tired. The lady hid her gaze and promised to be more careful. This surprised the prince, because usually his wife answered this with a light smile. He felt that the lady was hiding something, and he would really like to know what was going on in her soul right now. Leaving the room, the girl looked out the window, thinking that everything was very serious. The prince touched her only for the purpose of transferring Thera, and although she understood everything perfectly, she was overwhelmed by emotions. Every time she looked forward to when he would give her the energy to be peacefully in his arms. The girl understood that if there was no gap between them, then their hearts could be united by receiving great love. But she knew that this was not possible. Picking herself up, first of all she had to go meet the guests, and went to the room where they were already waiting for her. The ladies met Her Majesty, and the lady herself apologized for being late, but the girls themselves began to apologize for disturbing the Archduchess at such a wonderful period of her life. The lady did not understand what the ladies meant, and they began to sing, as they heard that the prince treated Lillian wonderfully. The Archduchess tried to calm her excited friends. The girl invited the ladies to continue the conversation over tea, and only after sitting down at the table did the ladies begin to share the news. The ladies began to tell that Lady Sophia had also proposed, and her family had already agreed to this marriage, so the wedding would soon take place. The culprit herself modestly confirmed. Immediately after this, one of the girls asked the Duchess if she really got married before she met her husband. Lillian confirmed, but after hearing that she was jealous, she became upset. Everyone thought it was beautiful. She managed to fall in love with a man in a world where the weight of marriage was lighter than a feather. The Archduchess did not know what to say to that. Every day the lady worked tirelessly, and in the end some preparations were enough. Madame Marine assured that all preparations would be completed before winter. Lillian wanted to ask something of the maids, and told them to take care of the non-working family members of the house servants. The woman wanted to say that it was too generous. The lady objected and said, "That times were not easy, and those who may have considerable problems in their families may turn away from them." Therefore, the lady wanted to get rid of weak points in advance. After listening, the maid immediately agreed, realizing that she had not thought about such a scenario. The woman was now convinced herself that the lady deserved the title of Empress even more than she herself expected. After that, she decided to hand over the keys to the palace to Lillian. However, the lady refused, assuring that it would be better if the keys were left with the senior maid, because before that she managed the palace very well and was sure that it would continue to be so. Madame Marine thanked the lady for her trust, promising to continue to try not to disappoint her. When the maid wanted to give her the keys, she showed that she trusted Lillian, but not only Madame showed it. Such changes also occurred with other employees. They trusted her. Also, the servants began to notice that harmony reigned between the couple, so they hoped for an addition to the prince's family in the near future. The Archduchess was grateful to all the workers for their kind words and trust in her, but she knew that she had only 5 years left to live. Knowing this, she understood that there was too little terra in her body, so she would not have enough strength to give birth to an heir during this time. The lady didn't notice how emotional she was, lost in thought, and didn't notice Rita's arrival. The maid came to announce that it was time for a midday nap. Having reported this, the maid wanted to leave the office, leaving the lady alone, but worried, turned around before leaving. As soon as the Archduchess got up from her seat, her nose began to bleed again from exhaustion. Rita immediately helped the lady into bed and handed over the tube with the medicine, but after inhaling, Lillian began to cough. The maid noticed that the medicine had already stopped working on the lady, so she said that Cedric should be called, and the lady herself should work less. The girl, in turn, tried to calm her friend down, assuring her that everything was not so bad. The girl understood that it was useless to argue, so she only replied that the lady was really very similar to her brother in this. However, the maid couldn't stop worrying about the lady because it all looked serious, to which Lillian assured her that despite knowing about it, she wanted to continue working. "Otherwise, I did not understand what was the meaning of such a life then." She finally managed to become someone who benefited people, unlike her past self. She was an exemplary daughter of the owner of the land of Turin, and then, despite her illness, she helped her brother. In addition, the prince himself received her with incredible warmth. And despite the fact that she did not want to fall in love with the prince, she did not want to lose the warmth that he gave her. That is why I wanted to remain useful until the very end. Lady coughed hard again, and Rita helped her take more medicine and lie down. The maid noticed that the lady began to eat less again, because she could not digest the food, and the bleeding became more frequent. Lillian told the maid that she would rest a little and asked not to let anyone into the room if she fell asleep. The prince expected his wife at dinner, but the lady's place remained empty. The servants told His Majesty that the Archduchess had already gone to bed. The prince was surprised, because it was still early. Damien decided to visit his wife, but the maid met him in front of the room and apologized, but could not let him pass. However, the prince did not accept such an answer, based on the fact that he was her husband, which should have been the exclusion of those who could be admitted to the chambers. However, Lady Havis was adamant. In addition, she reported that the lady was unlikely to be able to answer him. At this, the prince confirmed that in this case he would be even more needed by his wife. After that, Rita realized the truth of his words, because this truth was the only thing that still supported the maid, so she let him go. When he entered the room, he noticed that his wife was a little pale, but still she did not look so bad. He lightly kissed her on the forehead, and the lady began to feel the warm touch of the prince in her sleep. She opened her eyes, and noticing the man, asked how he got here. The prince replied that he insisted on seeing his wife. Leaning against her hands, he smelled blood. After examining them, he noticed that although they tried to wash their hands thoroughly, traces of blood still remained. However, he could not understand where it came from, because he did not notice any wounds on Lillian. The lady distracted him, and the prince said that he came because he was worried about her. His wife had not eaten normally for some time. At this, the lady agreed to eat a little. The prince was happy to hear that, so he ordered a light soup to be brought and agreed to feed her. She wanted to refuse, saying that she would call a maid for this, but the prince was upset by her words and the lady finally gave up, agreeing with her husband. Damien held up his spoon. The prince began to ask if the soup was too hot. The lady assured that everything was fine, but when she raised her hand to her nose, she felt that blood began to flow again. He immediately rushed to his wife, trying to help stop the bleeding. Rita ran into the room and handed her a towel. The girl accepted him and told the man to calm down, that everything is not so serious. After twisting her nose, she apologized for scaring the prince, assuring that she often had nosebleeds in dry weather. Looking at her, the prince smiled, saying that she should not apologize for this. Finally, he said that the lady needed a rest, so he would make room for now. After leaving the room, he stood outside the door for some time. The guy understood that his wife was lying to him. He had a bad feeling. He couldn't know for sure that the bleeding wasn't due to the weather, but he had a hunch that his wife was hiding something. Due to the fact that she was hiding some secret from him, the prince finally decided to write to her brother. Sitting in the office, the prince kept thinking about what exactly his wife could hide from him. She did not let him into her rooms. There were traces of blood on her fingers, and then also a nosebleed. This could definitely mean health problems. So he thought that the lady had pushed him away because she was afraid of getting infected, but he wondered why she didn't call a doctor. He began to worry even more when he realized that the problem could be more serious, but he immediately dismissed these thoughts because the lady still accepted his examination and examination by doctors. In the end, he decided that the lady was pushing him away because she was uncomfortable with his presence and somewhat distrustful of him, which is why he was forced to write this letter to allay the anxiety. After writing the letter, I sent it with the owl. In the letter, he said that his wife was unwell, but hid it, so he asked to send a doctor whom she could trust. In a short time, the letter was delivered. The aide informed Cedric that a message had come from Geralissimus. The answer from Turin did not have to wait long, and the prince wanted to see if his brother-in-law knew anything about his sister's illness. In the letter, the head wrote thanks, that he had received news about his sister for the first time in such a long period, and also rather discreetly reported that what he had read upset him. He also made it clear that everything that happened to his sister was the result of a hasty marriage. After reading the letter, Damien immediately imagined Cedric's emotions when writing it. Nevertheless, he never received an answer to his question, so he decided that the head himself was not aware of his sister's secrets. However, he decided that he had become so sensitive from his wife's constant refusals, and also because of that. Who was concerned about her health? The prince asked where his wife was now, and was very angry when she answered that she was working in the office, because only yesterday she was ill. Isaac said that the Archduchess was still dealing with the documents that the prince messed up, and only thanks to her, it was possible to bring everything back to normal. Damien did not understand what documents the knight was talking about. When the knight told everything, the prince became even more angry, because this was not a primary problem if we take into account the well-being of the lady. The knight admitted his mistake. However, the prince did not like how things were going, so he said that he would visit his wife. Walking down the corridor, the prince couldn't help but admit that there was nothing Lillian couldn't handle. Despite the fact that she had only recently arrived at the palace, she quickly won the trust of the servants. However, most of all, the prince wanted his wife to let him come closer. Then he would not ask for anything more. A wife who could do everything, but did not want to be near him. He couldn't let it go on like this, feeling that he might lose her. Therefore, he had no choice but to not allow her to work. The lady was very surprised to see him in the office. The prince replied that her husband could not allow the lady to work alone so much and ordered to transfer all the documents to his office. The lady wanted to stop them, but the prince made it clear that if she resisted, he would have to go to extreme measures. The prince had to experience a lot on the battlefield, and as a strategist, he knew that he would not lose in this confrontation, and was sure that this time he would get what he wanted. The girl understood why the prince acted like that, but she said that she was the mistress of this palace and the empress, and was responsible for her duties. She just wanted to prove her worth in the time she had left. Her words finally broke the prince. He thought the situation was under his control, but he was wrong. The only thing he wanted now was to hug Lillian. Surrendering, he said that if she agreed to take his Thera for an hour a day in the morning, then he would allow her to work for 2 hours every day. The lady did not understand what he wanted to achieve with this, and the prince explained that the best medicine for her was his energy, so he asked if she agreed to this proposal. The girl was surprised. She couldn't believe that it bothered him so much, but she understood that it would be difficult to refuse such an agreement, so she breathed out and said that she agreed. Satisfied with her decision, the prince spread his hands, and with this gesture made it clear that he wanted to begin her treatment right now. The girl did not understand why the prince wanted to play a joke on her. Since childhood, she did not like hugs. She felt uncomfortable because she had never been the first to hug someone before. The prince pretended that this delay from his wife meant that she did not agree to the terms after all, but the lady immediately assured him that this was not the case and threw herself into his arms. If it had been a dream, Lillian would have smiled sweetly at him and hugged him. But his wife, who was shrinking from shyness, was much more beautiful. The excessive accumulation of thera, which had troubled him since his mother's womb, the lady saved him from these torments. He only begged that his wife was not against this closeness and always hugged him first. The prince would very much like her to feel even a drop of the happiness that he received when he met her. He will forever keep this moment in his memory. Damien did not want to let her go, and the lady thought she had done something wrong, but the prince assured her that the lady understood everything correctly. The prince came even closer and said that now was the time to take medicine. The girl was a little taken aback by his words, but the prince was not repulsed by this, and he hugged her tighter. Turning to face her again, he reminded her that she had to take medicine, after which he kissed his wife. All this time, they were slowly retreating from the middle of the room and suddenly ran into the table. Seizing the moment, the prince sat his wife on the edge of the table. The girl wanted to ask him to take her out of here, but the prince only wanted them to continue and asked her to hug him. He could not stop enjoying the moment without wanting to let go of his wife even for a moment. Walking down the corridor, Madame Marine noticed the maids, who were having a lively discussion. The woman noticed that the girls were hiding something and warned them to be more careful. The maids apologized, promising to be quieter. When the senior maid went about her business, the girls breathed a sigh of relief, because they were worried that Madame would take the newspaper from them. They continued to discuss the news on page 6 and did not think that anyone had not read it yet. Even aristocrats were interested in this. The girls spoke in whispers, wondering if the senior maid also read this newspaper. The 6th page is a collection of household handkerchiefs, which was published by one publishing house. Of course, ordinary people were interested in this because they were also interested in the life of aristocrats. But what can be said, because even the nobles themselves, who despised the newspaper for showing a crude interest in their lives, secretly read it. The newspaper caused such a stir that even Madame Marine could not deny herself this reading material. She just sat down to find out what was interesting in today's issue, how the article evoked unusual emotions in her. The newspaper raised the topic of the prince's new wife and whether she would give birth to a 7-month-old child or an 8-month-old child. The woman could not contain her indignation, so she immediately went to the Archduchess with this, but Milady guessed that such gossip could spread, so she was not shocked. In addition, she assured that these gossips would come to naught in 3 months. But this did not convince the senior maid. She was still indignant at this impudence. The lady agreed that it was just humiliating nonsense, but said that if they seriously began to deny these rumors, the imperial family would become a laughingstock. Lillian assured the crown prince, Archduke and Turin that the best decision was to marry her off before her debut. Rita could not disagree with this, but still she was sorry that everything was happening like this now. The lady noticed that her maids were eagerly supporting each other in this regard, so she thought that the best solution now would be to continue working on the documents. The girl suddenly thought of the prince again, because he, as promised, poured thera into her every day, but the lady quickly forced herself to return to work. Madame Marine suddenly approached the table and said that she had a solution to remedy the situation and recommended choosing a new dress for Milady. After that, the girl thought that she had told the maid everything in vain. Following her, she found herself in a room full of various things. The lady said that these things were too many, but the madam assured her that they were not, for Damien had taken the admiralship of the Alt Sea, which had once belonged to the Grand Duke. The Alt Sea is the only trade route in the east. Most of the sea tolls and tolls paid there belonged to the Archduke. The lady still did not understand what Madame was leading her to, and the woman explained that Lillian had become the wife of an extremely rich man. All this is necessary so that others do not embarrass them. Madame Marine emphasized that the prestige and reputation of the archducal family depended on her appearance with the prince. But the lady doubted this. The maid assured that this was not the case. She said that she ordered dresses from the most famous atelier in the capital, and for this, she asked the tailor to change their work schedule. If the lady refuses, it will put the maid at a disadvantage. The lady understood that these were crocodile tears, but she could not refuse her. She was about to agree when the prince entered the room. It seemed to him that the maid threatened his wife. Damien apologized for his tactlessness and said he was just passing by, but he thought his wife was in trouble. The lady denied it. The prince nevertheless believed that the madam had created an unpleasant situation, and the maid began to assure that she did not seek to disturb the lady. The archduchess assured that everything was fine. Madame Maureen tried so hard that she could not refuse to try on new things. In the end, the prince did not object, and said that he would even turn a blind eye to Madame's rudeness. The woman was silent on this fox's tricks, because it was his idea from the very beginning. However, the woman knew that even as a child, Damien pleased the servants of the palace with his character and tricks. Viscountess Anna J. Osborne, owner of the atelier, also came to the estate. The lady gratefully accepted the offer to be in charge of the archduchess's wardrobe. The lady thanked and apologized that because of this, they forced the viscountess to change the schedule, but the woman, on the contrary, was only happy that she was given the opportunity to work with such high-quality materials. At this point, the owner of the atelier suggested starting with an outfit for the lady, and the assistants started trying on various fabrics. Decorations were also chosen for the fabrics. The girl liked everything, but she said that her husband would also wear such clothes, so she wanted to know his opinion. The prince assured that it did not matter to him and gave permission to the girls to choose. The ladies couldn't help but think that everything really suited this handsome man. They decided on this, and the viscountess said that the rest could be left to her. Damien drew his wife to him by praising her for her work. The prince also reported that he had received a message from the emperor. On the day the negotiations begin, he will need to patrol the western part of the empire. The lady was surprised by such suddenness. The prince only replied that the emperor probably did not trust him and believed that he could rebel at such a carefully planned action. The lady sadly replied that this action was the first for them as wife and husband. The prince was pleasantly surprised that the lady was saddened by the future absence of her husband, but after finishing Lillian thought that this might cause rumors to spread. The man was disappointed in her answer. The archduchess suddenly had a wonderful idea and bent down to share it with her husband. For himself, the prince noticed that the lady was now shamelessly approaching him. He did not say this out loud, so he listened carefully to what his wife wanted to say. The lady whispered about the negotiations and the Church of Elahan. The prince spoke of her idea as genius and said that if Claude found out about it, he would shake him by the skin and ask where he found such a wife. The lady was glad that her idea was liked. The prince assured that all this was true. She seemed to read his thoughts, and he believed that he was really lucky with his wife. The lady noticed this warm gesture on his part. She understood that the prince did not let her work because of her health, but then she began to think about herself that she was so useless. However, now the prince for the first time praised her for the work done. She did not understand what was the reason for her trembling in the heart. Taking his hand, she said that she was glad to help. Her smile made his heart beat faster, but he understood what caused the palpitations. The prince understood that he loved this person, and without her love, he would immediately die. At that, he asked his wife if he could kiss her. Lillian agreed. The prince realized that he had never felt more confident than now. While she was working, Matteo visited her. The lady invited him, and the prince immediately told that there had been an uproar in society about her and her husband's actions. The prince said that the first thing the couple will do for the first time is to visit the Church of Elahan, where his father was buried. The lady confirmed that those were indeed her words, but thought that the prince would mind if he came to say it in person. The prince assured that, on the contrary, he was pleased that his father's memory was not being forgotten, but he asked to do it at another time, because now it was dangerous. The lady did not understand why. Then he explained that the great negotiations were dedicated to the emperor's 7-year reign. A lot of effort was put into their organization. Therefore, if the lady does not make her debut at this event, but decides to visit his father, then this can create unnecessary pressure on her. To this, the lady said that even if so, but because of this, the emperor could lose respect. Matteo said that for such matters, the emperor had his own person, Lady Rachel's mistress. Now she had a lot of influence on secular society and can use it on the archduchess at any event. The prince said he was grateful to the lady for her desire to honor his father's memory, but did not want her to suffer because of it. He didn't know if he had the right to say that. The prince just wanted the lady to remain useless and unnoticed. To all this, the lady replied that it is not necessary to stand out in order to get into trouble, so she wanted to strike first. The prince replied that the lady might later regret her actions. She understood that, so he asked why to do such a thing, and Lillian answered that it would be right. Matteo was familiar with this piercing look. Even as a child, the courtiers considered him cute, and sometimes it crossed the line. And in the midst of all this carelessness, a thin man with a piercing look walked towards him without any hesitation. Unlike everyone around him, he was always polite to the prince, even when he was little. He was the former head of the Turin lands. The prince was sure that the former head had a similar mindset to the lady, so he sided with his father, so he saw Lillian as the heiress of Turin. The girl was pleased to hear his words. She also immediately told him the news that he would be her companion at the opening of the event. This stunned the boy. In the end, the lady decided to admit that their decision to visit the church, as the first joint outing of the couple, was that they would not be able to be together at the opening. The young man wanted to say that it would be strange if the Archduke was not there at her debut, but the lady understood that anyway, so she replied that the best decision was to take the prince as a partner. Matteo did not understand how a lady could still treat him like a younger brother. If she had noticed his true feelings, she would have definitely avoided him. Like a bolt from the sky, the prince realized that Lillian actually saw him as a younger brother. The lady did not know what the prince was thinking, but she thought that he did not really want to take part in it. The guy immediately began to assure that he did not mean that. He realized in his mind that he had no right to take offense at the lady because he was really 4 years younger than her, and she could consider him too young. He said he would do everything not to cause trouble. The girl reciprocated. After the prince left, Lillian told Rita that she felt a bit sorry for the prince, but it was the best option. The maid agreed, but mentally noted that it still hurt the young man. She noticed the true feelings of the prince and did not understand why he decided to fall in love with her lady, because it was a notoriously thorny path. Meanwhile, Matteo barely made it to his rooms without even understanding how he got there. The thought did not leave the head that he was offered to be the lady's partner. However, the prince could not help but appreciate at least the moment he would spend next to Lillian, because it was priceless to him. Everyone had already gathered in the corridor. They were only waiting for the Archduchess herself. In a moment, she came down the stairs and apologized for waiting. Everyone immediately turned their fascinated eyes to her. The husband also couldn't take his eyes off his wife, rejoicing that she was wearing his gift. Among all the precious things prepared for Lily, the moonstone earrings caught his eye the most. In the beginning, the mother gave these earrings to Idol, telling him to give them to his daughter or daughter-in-law. The brother gave these earrings to him, and in the end, they found their mistress, who suited them very well. Out of most gifts that could have made a mountain, the lady chose exactly what he pointed out. It was true that beautiful things were created for beautiful people. Before leaving, the prince put a mantle on his wife. The lady pointed out that all eyes were on them. However, the husband said that he did not see anything wrong in this, and extended his hand to his wife, which she accepted with a smile. Damien felt the lady's hand tremble slightly, and assumed she was worried. The girl replied that it was exactly like that, because it was her first exit into the secular world. The husband reassured his wife, and said that he had earned a somewhat bad reputation in the neighboring states, and she could use it as a shield. He even allowed her to invent something about herself, at which his wife laughed, and they left the palace in high spirits. They arrived at the Church of Elihan, the resting place of Emperor Edoel, but even so, the place was smaller than the lady had expected. However, the lady could not pay attention to the fact that the church looked clean and tidy, and thought that it was the merit of the local monks. Approaching the emperor's resting place, the couple silently began to offer prayers for his repose. The last words of the emperor were highlighted on the tombstone that he left this world to enjoy death, and hoped that all who remained were happy. Only by these words could the lady understand what the emperor really was. She thought that she would also choose this place for her rest. She wondered if everyone who remained was really happy. The crown prince also bowed his head to honor his father's memory. With that, Matteo wanted to end this little ceremony, but before leaving, he wanted to show the garden that the monks had built for the emperor. Edoel's favorite prayer was carved on the monument. Suddenly, the servants informed the prince that a guest had arrived. The boy looked and immediately recognized that Ethan Schmidt was standing next to him. The prince did not hide his anger when he asked why Blanche had come here, and did not even want to hear any explanations. The boy understood that the prince would not listen to any of his words, so he passed by after apologizing. People began to whisper that they did not understand what was on the mind of the older count, but that was precisely why it was not the place now. Milady silently passed Ethan's gaze, and noticing this, the prince asked if everything was okay with her. Lillian had once dated the younger sister of the heir Blanchet, but despite the relationship, she could not tell that they were alike. Daman extended his hand to his wife to try to leave this place, and the lady noticed that the man's mood had deteriorated. They returned to the Archduke's residence only in the evening. A small table was laid, and the prince was the first to raise a glass to honor the memory of the past emperor. He whispered to his wife to pretend to drink. Although the man told her to do it, the lady understood that it was alcohol in honor of honor, so she wanted to drink at least. Barely touching, Lily felt that the temperature of the drink was a little high, and the prince immediately leaned towards her, saying that he asked her not to, but the lady said that it would be impolite. Matteo also noticed that the lady was behaving strangely, and began to worry that her well-being had worsened. The prince gave his wife a glass of water and told her to rinse her mouth. He asked if she would have the strength to sit still, to which the lady assured that she could. Besides, it was her first time out in the world. The prince replied that it was a very strong drink, so no wonder she got drunk on it. Daman told his wife to lean on him and not mind if it was taken as rudeness. The girl decided that now it was better to accept the prince's proposal because it was better than feeling dizzy and getting confused. Of course, this was not hidden from the view of the guests, but they did not condemn her, because even for men, this drink was very strong, and not everyone tolerated it. Moreover, the guests considered the lady's act noble, as for someone who could not tolerate alcohol, but drank it to honor her memory. Lillian began to think that the hall was a bit noisy, but the prince reassured her that nothing bad had been said about her. In addition, he emphasized that the wife was popular among the aristocrats, because her first appearance in the world was a visit to the emperor's grave and a memorial service, so she could relax. The man's words made the lady understand that all the people currently sitting at the table were on her side. The guests also began to talk that they noticed the beautiful character of the Archduchess and that her husband really cherished his wife. They also noticed that the crown prince kept looking at Milady, believing that they had a good relationship. At this point, the man thought that if he won the favor of the Archduchess, who is closely watched by the Archduke and the crown prince, he would be able to get their attention. The man thought that it was worth bringing a gift to my lady as soon as possible under the pretext of today's memorial service, so he apologized and said that he would leave the guests first. At this, all the guests began to leave their seats one by one, simultaneously paying attention that they had other urgent matters. The prince did not let his wife and guests go. Already in her rooms, Lillian slowly began to come to her senses. Rita brought another glass of water. Milady tried to reach for the glass, but the strength was not enough, and the prince helped his wife to drink water by himself. The prince could not help but think that normally his wife would not drink alcohol under any circumstances. She, who always tried to behave decently, put herself in a defenseless position so easily. But still he checked her glass and paid attention, that she drank a maximum of half a sip. Although the drink was very strong, it was not enough to get so drunk. After kissing his wife before going to bed, the prince promised himself that he would not let her drink a single drop of alcohol again, because she did not tolerate it well. The lady smiled at him and told him that he needn't have worried, as she was all right so far. Daman couldn't let her words pass his ears, because she said that so far everything was fine with her. He definitely did not hear this word yet. It seemed as if Lily was saying that she wasn't going to die just yet, but these thoughts troubled him even more. All the headlines were about the Archduke and his wife, and because of this, Lady Rachel was finally able to see what the Archduchess looked like. Betty assured her that her mistress was far prettier and that there was nothing special about the Archduchess. However, the maid was interested in whether such an important matter could really be entrusted to Ethan Schmidt. The lady thought about it and asked what exactly was wrong. The maid refused, that Sir Blanchet's methods were not perfect. She understood that his target was the Archduchess, but following her all the way to the Emperor's tomb was too much. Because of this, the Crown Prince noticed him and immediately expelled him. Ethan should have made a better impression on them, not the other way around, but Rachel was sure it would work out. The lady knew that the maid had feelings for the young gentleman, so she asked for him to be replaced. If the maid hadn't cheated, the lady would have given her a couple of jewels, but she couldn't stand girls who thought they could fool the whole world when everything was written on their face. The day before the meeting, Cedric arrived at the Riefenbein residence. Lillian was extremely happy to see her brother. The head, in turn, immediately began to ask about her sister's well-being, and the girl said that everything was fine with her and that there was no need to worry. To divert her brother's attention from her, she offered him to sit down. The lady said that she would like to meet her brother with her husband, but the head was not offended because he knew that the Archduke had been sent on patrol before the great negotiations. Milady immediately asked how things were going with her brother, because she was sure that while she was gone, he was working overtime, and Alain confirmed it. Hearing their conversation, Madame Marine apologized for interrupting, but wanted to say something. Although she did not know how to let go of the dearest person, because she was always alone, she assured the head that she would do everything possible to make the Archduchess feel good. The chief was glad to hear these words, because he was worried that the people of the former emperor would treat his sister with contempt. But now he clearly saw that Lillian had become a true mistress. And yet, Cedric was saddened to realize that his sister was fine here. The lady did not understand why the brother was indignant, and the knight explained that her brother was offended that the lady did not choose him as a partner at the banquet. The lady once again explained to her brother that it was time for him to choose a wife and go with her to such events. The head jumped up from this. However, the girl did not want to let go of the situation, and jealously reported that in the women's circle she was the only one who did not have a nephew, which made her jealous of the other ladies. Although she said everything in jest, she was still worried that her brother might be lonely. He has already reached marriageable age, and he has not even thought about the wedding. Lillian began to think that her brother could be afraid of this, because the death of his parents left a deep wound in his soul. He probably didn't want to risk his family's safety by making it his weak point. However, their killer, Claude I, was still alive. Probably for this reason, he worried about her so much, because she was the only person close to him. On this, the lady assured that she would not insist if her brother did not want it, but she still wanted him to have his own family, apart from her. But she couldn't help but say that a person became stronger when she had someone to protect. However, she also hoped that her brother would have a wife and children who could support him when she was gone. After thinking about everything a little, the head said that if the sister so wanted nephews, then they could be adopted. But that was not what the girl meant. Nevertheless, seeing her brother's reaction, she realized that Shaw had not told him about his sister's condition. It was a relief for her. The evening came on the day of the great negotiations. The lady was in the steam room and thought there was a little too much in the milk bath prepared for her. Madame Marine, on the other hand, believed that at tonight's dinner everyone would be discussing the Archduchess, so it was necessary to tie everyone up. At this, the lady assured that a milk bath is the best way to keep the skin in tone, and today the lady will be the most beautiful lady in the capital. Suddenly, shadows were noticed on Lillian's body, and the maids thought that it was the prince's handiwork in a good way. Noticing how the maids squealed with delight, the Archduchess already guessed what they were thinking about, although in fact she accidentally hit the table recently. After the bath, massages with aromatic oils immediately began, and after that, without a single break, there were dress fittings. After the dress was chosen, Madame Maureen said that she wanted to help the lady adjust the hem of the dress and asked her to stand in front of the mirror. Lillian examined herself. The maids were also very impressed with the image of their mistress, and the Duchess did not miss a moment to thank them for their efforts. The Crown Prince was already waiting for her, and the lady hastened to go out to him, apologizing for being late. Matteo could not find the words to compliment Milady. When he regained consciousness, he rushed to her saying that he had the honor to accompany such a beautiful lady today. In turn, Lillian apologized for causing some inconvenience to the prince and hoped for his generosity. The prince assured me that this was not the case and thought that he was, on the contrary, extremely lucky. The uncle's absence was due to the emperor's ignorance. Claude grew up and left the palace, so he never got to meet Damien. And because of this, when he heard about his brother, the monster of the imperial palace, he thought that it was a children's nickname. In addition, the emperor had no military experience. He passed the military service without any difficulties, so he could not judge the strength of his brother, entrusting him with the guard of the palace to prevent his presence at the opening ceremony. However, it was for this reason that Matteo was able to hold Lillian's hand today. With that, they went to the ceremony, and the prince, walking beside him, hoped that the lady could not read his thoughts. But for some reason, looking into her clear eyes, it seemed to him as if the lady knew what he was thinking. Paying attention to the fact that the prince's ears and face turned red, the Archduchess assumed that he was uncomfortable going to the ceremony holding her hand. Finally, they arrived at the palace and almost approached the guards who were checking the guests on the list. Matteo said that they were almost at the threshold of the hall and asked if she was ready. The girl thought for a moment because behind the door was hidden an elegantly designed battlefield called Banquet. It was there that various emotions of relationships between people were woven into a web. Sometimes your mind was tested there, and sometimes your character. However, she was sure that all this was the same as the meetings in the Women's Society, so there was nothing to be afraid of. And she was definitely ready for anything.